debate, as noble lords will be aware, gradually as time moves on, we lose many of the first-hand survivors of the Holocaust who were so engaged in education of our young people and the rest of us. I would, with the permission of the House, just like to read the names of some of those who we've lost during this year. Ava Schloss, MBE, who died on the 3rd of January 2026, a co-founder and honorary president of the Anne Frank Trust UK and stepsister of Anne Frank. Manfred Goldberg, MBE, who died on the 6th of November 2025, a Holocaust survivor and educator who died aged 95. Manfred's story is part of the Holocaust Education Trust Virtual Reality 360 education programme. Harry Ulmer, who died on the 15th of January 2026, a Holocaust survivor and Holocaust educator. Vera Schalfield, MBE, who died in January 2026, aged 95, who came to the UK on the Kinder transport, shared her story up and down the country, including with our staff at the Department of Ministry, Housing, Communities and Local Government. Eve Kugler, BEM, a Holocaust survivor who witnessed Kristallnacht and shared her story, again including with staff in my department. Suzanne Rappaport-Ripton, who died in June 2025. She was a founder member of the Holocaust Survivors Friendship Association, now Holocaust Centre North. And Ruth Posner, who died in September 2025, an extraordinary woman. Ruth survived the Radom ghetto, slave labour and life in hiding under a false identity. By the end of the war, Ruth and her aunt were the only surviving members of her family. After a dazzling career in theatre and dance, Ruth decided to begin sharing her testimony as a response to rising levels of anti-Semitism in the UK. My Lords, I'd like to thank all of those who share their testimony and who help us remember and who will continue to make their mark on our remembrance of Holocaust and its victims. Tomorrow's Holocaust Memorial Day is not only a date in the diary for me, it's a moment I return to each year with humility and resolve. A day that makes me reflect and pause on the stories I grew up hearing and the lessons my parents impressed upon me about the horrors of hatred. Tomorrow we remember the 6 million Jewish men, women and children murdered in the Holocaust, and the Roma, Sinti, disabled people, Jehovah's Witnesses, gay men and political opponents who were also persecuted and killed. Each one had a name, each had a story, each was loved. Behind every number was a human being whose life was cut short by hatred and a machinery of persecution that sought to erase entire communities. We also remember those who, against all the odds, survived. Many rebuilt their lives in the UK and dedicated themselves to sharing their testimony, ensuring that future generations understood both the horrors they endured and the hope that they managed to hold on to. Many of us in this room have been privileged to hear these survivors speak with honesty, courage, and an often extraordinary generosity of spirit. My own family roots are in the East End of London, once home to a vibrant and close-knit Jewish community. Even those of us whose families were not directly targeted felt the shockwaves as news of the camps emerged. In homes like my parents' and grandparents', the stories of what happened were spoken about with a kind of hushed reverence, an understanding that something beyond comprehension had taken place. They taught us that while we could never fully feel that depth of pain, we had an absolute duty to learn about it, remember it, and pass the lessons on. This year's Holocaust Memorial Day theme, Bridging Generations, feels especially poignant as we move into a time when survivors' voices are fading. Many have now fallen silent, yet it is our responsibility to ensure their legacy does not fade with them. Bridging generations is not an abstract concept, it is the quiet question from a child trying to understand why people were hated for who they were. It's the moment in a school assembly when a survivor's words change the entire mood of the room. It is the recognition that truth, when spoken plainly, has the power to transform hearts. The Holocaust did not begin with camps and crematoria. It began with words, with prejudice that became normalised, then embedded in policy, then allowed to flourish unchecked. It moved from insult to exclusion, from exclusion to persecution, and from persecution to genocide. My Lord's, memory is our safeguard. Forgetting is the first step towards repeating history. I feel a profound personal responsibility to ensure that these stories are never lost. That's why I'm proud that in 2024, the Prime Minister pledged that every student in the country should have the opportunity to hear recorded survivor testimony. By enabling every young person to access first-person accounts, we build resilience against distortion and denial. The Holocaust Educational Trust's Testimony 360 programme will allow students to virtually meet survivors and explore historical sites using virtual reality. Long after survivors can no longer be with us, young people will be able to hear their voices, ask questions and engage with history in a way that feels deeply personal and immediate. The Holocaust Testimony Portal, created by the Association of Jewish Refugees and supported by the government, is another vital initiative. The portal brings together thousands of interviews with survivors, refugees, rescuers, liberators, providing user-friendly access to decades of testimony. Generations to come will be able to learn from those accounts. Initiatives like Generation to Generation ensure descendants of survivors continue sharing family histories, preserving the human threads that connect past and present. When I was a council leader, I set up a Holocaust Memorial event in Stevenage. It was over 15 years ago. And I've been privileged to listen firsthand and to family and first-hand testament at that event each year. A couple of years ago, I listened to Anita Peleg speak about her mother, the sculptor Naomi Blake. I remember the hush in the room as Anita played a recording of her mother's own words. It was the kind of silence that falls when truth settles on the heart. Heavy, yet somehow illuminating. Naomi Blake, who survived Auschwitz and went on to create art filled with hope and renewal, embodied the extraordinary resilience of the human spirit. Hearing her voice reminded me that testimony is not merely information, it is a gift of courage, of memory, and of humanity. And listening to our Lord Lieutenant Robert Voss, whose parents escaped Nazi Germany, but who when he came to our meeting, told us his account of his paternal grandparents murdered in the gas chambers of Sobibor in June 1942. That moment touched me deeply, and it strengthened my resolve to ensure these stories are never allowed to fade. Other projects, such as Ordinary Objects, Extraordinary Journeys, a collaboration between the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust, National Holocaust Centre and Museum, and the Jewish Museum of Greece, show how even everyday belongings can bear witness. A pair of glasses, a letter, a suitcase. These objects speak when words feel short. They provide a tangible link to lives interrupted and remind us of the profound human cost of anti-Semitism and hatred. Restoring names to victims is another sacred responsibility. Yad Vashem's project to identify the 6 million murdered Jews is a monumental effort grounded in the belief that every person deserves to be remembered. A name is the most personal thing we have, chosen with love, often carried through generations. For the Nazis, names became tools of persecution. For us, restoring them is an act of dignity, remembrance and defiance against those who sought to erase an entire people. Yet today, all too sadly, Holocaust denial and distortion persist. We still see anti-Semitic slogans and graffiti on our streets and trivialisation of the Holocaust in public discourse, online spaces and even protests. Anti-Semitism is not new to Britain. We know that it stretches back to medieval times, and tragically, it has never disappeared. The Community Security Trust recorded more than 1,500 anti-Semitic incidents in just the first half of 2025. This rise demands a clear and courageous response, and can I pay tribute to the CST for all the work that they do in supporting our Jewish community. Education, my lords, remains our strongest defence. Young people are bombarded daily with information, some unreliable, some deliberately misleading. We must ensure they have the tools to distinguish truth from manipulation and history from distortion. Teaching about the Holocaust is not simply about understanding the past, it's about shaping a future where hatred cannot take root so easily. That's why I believe the National Holocaust Memorial and Learning Centre at the heart of our capital, beside Parliament, matters so deeply. It will stand as a daily reminder to decision makers, visitors and future generations that this country takes its responsibility to remember seriously. There are differing views, and it is right that Parliament has debated them so fully. But I feel the duty my parents and grandparents felt to ensure the lessons of the Holocaust are carried forward with honesty and with integrity. We cannot change the history behind us, but we can shape the history ahead. And so I make this commitment. I will listen, I will learn, I will speak, and I will help those who come after us to do the same. My lords, I look forward to the debate ahead of us this afternoon. I move.
Yeah. My lord.
This motion be agreed to.
Lords, draw attention to the fact that I'm the co-chairman of the UK Holocaust Memorial Foundation. It's a great pleasure to follow the Honourable Lady. I thought it was a wonderful way to start a speech to remind us of the survivors that we've lost this year. Many of them were friends, people that we knew, people that we shared a joke with, shared a meal with, and worked together for Holocaust remembrance. I mourn them all, but I particularly mourn Manfred, who did such outstanding work. May all of their memories be a blessing. Whatever the circumstances, we have got ourselves a whole day's debate here, and I hope that the government will think long and hard next year and ensure that, if not the precise circumstances how this debate's occurred, that we get a whole day's debate. I agreed with the sentiments of the Honourable Lady, I agreed with the speech, and as someone once said, I even agreed with the punctuation. Holocaust Memorial Day challenges to confront one of the darkest chapters in human history. But remembrance requires more than ritual. It's not enough simply to speak solemnly in Parliament, to stand in silence, or to light a candle once a year. Ceremony without action becomes ceremony without meaning. True remembrance demands leadership, moral, civic, and institutional, and leadership willing to resist hatred in all its modern forms. In 2025, Britain received a series of wake-up calls that showed how fragile our complacency had become. A violent attack on Jews in Manchester, the conviction of terrorists who planned the mass murder of Jewish people, the shocking murders at Bondi Beach, a pop star calling for the killing of Jews broadcast on the nation's media, and the disturbing failure of West Midlands Police, who chose ideology over evidence in describing an anti-Semitic attack. Each incident triggered brief outrage, followed by national amnesia, shock, condemnation, forgetting. And then the cycle begins again. But the danger has not passed. Britain, like much of the world, is sleepwalking into disaster. We hear the word genocide thrown around casually, stripped of its precise and grave legal meaning. This trivialization obscures the real genocidal ideologies, including those openly embraced by Hamas, whose intent is clear from both their words and their actions. Jew hatred has returned violently in Israel, genteelly on British streets, and through silence is response to atrocities against Jews elsewhere. The events of the 7th of October marked a turning point. The massacre that day was driven by a murderous ideology with deep historic roots. It reveals itself in acts of brutality that defy language, murder, mutilation, rape, the kidnapping of children and the elderly. And yet almost immediately the world saw denial, distortion and the inversion of victims and predicated. Those are ancient patterns, and together with modern disinformation, they threaten not only Jewish communities, but the principles of liberal democracy. That is why we must confront the reality of anti-Semitism today, measurable, documented, and rising. The data speaks with clarity. More than 1,500 anti-Semitic incidents were recorded in the first half of 2025, as a noble lady said, the second highest total ever for that period. More than 200 incidents every month. And they saw sharp spikes following high-profile provocations, including the chants at Glastonbury, proving how cultural platforms can amplify extremism. University campuses show a slight reduction from the recorded highs of 2024, but a drop from crisis levels is not normal. A campus where Jewish students hide their identity, avoid events, or face intimidation is not a safe campus, and does not respect academic freedoms. Anti-Semitism is not a metropolitan phenomenon. The numbers in Manchester have been described as sickening, but incidents occur in cities, towns and rural communities across the country. This is a national problem. Institutional responses remain inconsistent. Policing varies dramatically from place to place. Public bodies hesitate. Cultural institutions falter under political pressures, and inconsistency creates space in which extremism grows. We can legislate against crime, but we can't legislate away hatred. The long-term defence is education. Yet this is where new challenges have emerged. The number of schools marking Holocaust Memorial Day has fallen sharply, from 2,000 in 2023 to 1,200 in 2024, and only 850 in 2025. Teachers express uncertainty about discussing modern conflicts. Some refuse to mark Holocaust Memorial Day unless reframed. This is not just a moment to reflect, it's a warning, and it's a duty to deal with it. We are at a crossroads at which we have to address this clearly. We need to ensure that leadership is there because we cannot educate children about the Holocaust unless those children are prepared to be in classrooms. We must ensure that we recognise that this is something that is going to affect all of us. Now, I'd like to conclude by dealing with a question that we've grappled with. We've been worried about the nature of the Holocaust and whether it's going to be diluted by other subsequent Holocausts, and we're worried that somehow we're going to do Holocaust light. And I think the debate that we had the other day was clear that's not our intention. But we mustn't, I think, forget the Roma genocide. I think it was Danny Dion that reminded me most forcefully that the characteristics of the Holocaust applied almost exclusively as well to the Roma genocide. It showed that people were selected not on the basis of who they were or what they did or where they lived, but on the basis of the Nazis' views on race. He reminded me that Adolf Eichmann, in his trial in Israel in the 1960s, faced charges against him for the Roma genocide. And I sincerely hope that the Roma will find themselves able to commemorate their genocide at the new national memorial when it's built. I'm also pleased to announce that the Shaw Foundation from the United States are in negotiations with the foundation in order to ensure that we have and have become one of the main servers of that institution's enormous records of Holocaust testimony, which will ensure that the United Kingdom can bring with it many of its methods of remembrance of the Holocaust. To me, there are many photographs that bring the Holocaust to mind. But for me, there are really two main photographs that always bring it back to me. The first, and I suspect to be familiar to members right around the House, the first one is the young boy at the Warsaw uprising that's been arrested, and you see this little boy with his hands in the air surrendering to large German soldiers. I'm pleased to say that there's good evidence to say that young man survived. The second is of a frightened young girl peering out of a cattle truck with a scarf. She's Roma, she's on the way to Auschwitz, and she will not survive. Those two young people show what we lost. They show the possibilities that we didn't have. We must confront. We must do more than light candles. We must ensure that our children and our grandchildren and those that survive in a multicultural Britain remember the Holocaust, remember what happens when government goes bad, and we will ensure that their memory will always be kept.
Sorry. My Lord, may I just add an article which appeared in the Financial Times.
My Lords, I thank the Noble Lady, the Minister and the Noble Lord Pickles for their impressive speeches, and I very much agree with Noble Lord Pickles that we must do more than light candles. I also look forward to the maiden speech of the Right Reverend Prelate, the Bishop of Coventry. I want to talk about the need, based on the experience of the Holocaust, not only, of course, for constant vigilance against anti-Semitism, but also for the perception and courage to swim against a tide and stand up to the mob. That vigilance and resolve must, of course, extend to all prejudice and hate based on race, religion, ethnicity, or any other characteristic, but there is something unique and specific about the 2,000-year history of demonisation of Jews and the depths of anti-Semitism which led to the Shoah, which must not be overlooked or forgotten. How could we forget, in fact, that we are holding this debate not only 2.5 years after the massacres of October the 7th, 2023, but shortly after the terrorist atrocities at Heaton Park Synagogue in Manchester and in Sydney, the dishonourable conduct of West Midlands police towards the Israeli football fans, and numerous anti-Semitic incidents. I attended this morning the event to mark this year's International Holocaust Memorial Day, hosted by the FCDO and the Embassy of Israel, and I'll come back to some of the words spoken at this event. But I fell to wondering how many of those attending marches and demos supposedly in favour of Palestinians in Gaza, who chanted not only from the river to the sea, Palestinians will be free, which implies the destruction of the State of Israel, but also globalise the Intifada, which implies worldwide violence against Jews, actually felt uneasy about one or both of those chants, but suppressed their doubts in order to be one of the in crowd. I have watched 3 films about the Holocaust within the last 10 days. I belatedly caught Nuremberg at the cinema, and then both Schindler's List and The Zone of Interest have been on the television, but I watched them again. In my speech on this day 2 years ago, I quoted Dov Foreman, great-grandson of Holocaust survivor the late great Lily Ebert, and I do so again. This dark chapter in history wasn't only about mass murder. It was the destruction of a rich Jewish culture and civilization that had thrived for thousands of years. To remember the Holocaust is to acknowledge both the Jewish lives and the Jewish life that was lost. But I noticed to my surprise that Schindler's List was not only broadcast pretty late, finishing at nearly 2 a.m. as it had to wait for the live snooker to finish, but both it and Nuremberg had a classification of 15 from the British Board of Film Classification. The justification for a minimum age of 15 for Nuremberg included that it contained, quote, images of real dead bodies. While for Schindler's List, it was that, quote, based on a true story, younger viewers may find the film's depictions of persecution and the Holocaust emotionally upsetting. Well, yes, that is the point of Holocaust education, to teach people what happened in terms of dead bodies and physical and emotional horror. If they are not in consequence upset, distressed, outraged, despairing at what inhuman persecution, murder and destruction people are capable of perpetrating against their fellow human beings, then the basis for action to stop indifference is not laid. I think at least all secondary-age children should watch these films at school, as well as at home, as the basis for a discussion about the horror of the Holocaust and other genocides. I was 6 years old when I watched a serial on the TV called The Silver Sword, 1958, about child refugees from the Nazis. This is a synopsis I found online. On a cold, dark night in Warsaw in 1942, the Baliki children watch in horror as Nazi stormtroopers arrest their mother. Now they are alone, with the war raging round them, food and shelter are hard to come by. They live in constant fear. Finally, they get word that their father is alive. He has made it to Switzerland. Edek and Ruth are determined to find him, though they know how dangerous the long trip from Warsaw will be. But they also know that if they don't make it, they may never see their parents again. I don't actually remember much of the plot, with only snapshots remaining imprinted on my memory. And unlike so many histories of the period, this fictional story had a happy ending. But notwithstanding that, what has persisted with me is a sense of fear and desperation, or in the words of one online comment, just an image of devastation and loss, and a knowledge that this was something powerful and important. This is, of course, nothing compared to the ghastly memories of those who endured the Holocaust or the real and terrible losses of those whose families perished in it. But I think it's important that those deep feelings of fear, devastation and desperation continue to strike a chord with people of all kinds, both within and beyond the Jewish community, if the pledge of never again is to have any meaning. Hence the essential need for Holocaust education. And I am grieved and disappointed to hear that fewer schools are delivering that. I have always believed that Nazism, fascism, and their like, with the combination of obedience to authoritarian rule and callousness towards human suffering, is a virus which can be caught anywhere in any country. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney last week quoted in his speech to the World Economic Forum in Davos from Václav Havel's 1978 essay, The Power of the Powerless, which was about how the communist system sustained itself. Prime Minister Carney quoted, "And his answer began with a greengrocer. Every morning this shopkeeper places a sign in his window, 'Workers of the world, unite.' He doesn't believe it, no one does, but he places the sign anyway to avoid trouble, to signal compliance, to get along. And because every shopkeeper on every street does the same, the system persists. Not through violence alone, but through the participation of ordinary people in rituals they privately know to be false." Havel called this living within a lie. The system's power comes not from its truth, but from everyone's willingness to perform as if it were true. Rudolf Höss, the commandant of Auschwitz, apparently saw himself as a cog in the wheel of the great extermination machine created by the Third Reich. American military psychologist Gustav Gilbert wrote of his discussions with Höss during the Nuremberg trials, at which Höss testified that, quote, "In all of the discussions, Höss is quite matter-of-fact and apathetic, shows some belated interest in the enormity of his crime, gives the impression that it never would have occurred to him if somebody hadn't asked him." In a remark this morning at the Holocaust Memorial Day event at the Foreign Office, Meg Davis, a Holocaust Educational Trust young ambassador, struck a similar note when she talked of how compliance is the enabler. To my mind, Holocaust education needs to encompass not only the terrible history of anti-Semitism and where it laid, but also the importance of an instinct and resolve against compliance and conformity. People who refuse to go with the flow, who have the guts to say, "This is not right," who are difficult and even objectionable to some minds, are essential grit in our pledge of never again. Because the warning signs tend to come long before the atrocities. The grandfather of the present Noble Lord, Lord Russell of Liverpool, was the second Lord Russell of Liverpool. He was the Deputy Judge Advocate General to the British Army of the Rhine, one of the chief legal advisors during the war crimes trials in Nuremberg, and wrote a book, The Scourge of the Swastika, on his experiences. And with the kind agreement of the current Noble Lord, I would like to quote some passages from that book. Firstly, the author noted that a few months before the outbreak of war, a, quote, menacing German Foreign Office circular must have clearly pointed out the course of future events to all but those who did not wish to see it. The circular read, "It is certainly no coincidence that the fateful year of 1938 has brought nearer the solution of the Jewish question, simultaneously with the realization of the idea of Greater Germany. The advance made by Jewish influence and destructive Jewish spirit in politics, economy and culture paralyzed the power and will of the German people to rise again. The healing of this sickness among the people was therefore certainly one of the most important requirements for exerting the force which in the year 1938 resulted in the joining together of Greater Germany in defiance of the world." So, you know, we were warned. And the second Lord Russell of Liverpool thus observed quite rightly that the persecution of the Jews in the countries which the Nazis invaded and occupied between 1939 and 1945 was indeed on a stupendous scale, but it cannot have taken anyone by surprise. who had followed the rise of the Nazis to power in 1933, or their party programme. Point 4 of that programme declared only a member of the race can be a citizen. A member of the race can only be one who is of German blood without consideration of creed. Consequently, no Jew can be a member of that race. So that was 6 years before the outbreak of the war. And these reflections strike a deep chord in me after the period since October the 7th intensified the fears about how an attitude explained as anti-Zionism and opposition to Israel, the blood libel of our times, transforms so easily into raw anti-Semitism and the dehumanisation of Jews. An interview in today's Telegraph with Professor Sir Simon Sharma notes that his TV programme about the Holocaust, The Road to Auschwitz, was rigorous in its examination of how the Nazis found willing accomplices in mass murder while others looked away. The journalist notes how Marian Tursky, one of the last survivors of Auschwitz, said, "Auschwitz did not fall from the sky. Evil comes step by step." And Professor Sir Simon Sharma says, there has been a qualitative shift towards the sense that the Jews are kind of enemies among us. I think there's been a shift from the fury about what Israel said to have done in Gaza to essentially dehumanising Jews generally. And Holocaust survivor Marla Tribich told us this morning of her experience at Ravensbrück. We were stripped of our identifiers and totally dehumanised. Let's react this time before we know precisely how bad it can get.
My Lords, for some of us, every day is Holocaust Remembrance Day. It's a pain we carry within our bodies, like a physical pain. And it would be alleviated if only my parents had lived to see me in the House of Lords and an event like today, marking the grievous effect that the Holocaust had on them and, of course, their relatives and parents and wider family. We are grateful for national efforts to commemorate the Holocaust, but we remain troubled by the way the story of our lost families and the destruction of much of Central European Jewish life is often presented. I begin by paying tribute to the more than 1,200 victims of the atrocities of 7th of October and to the more than 200 people who were taken hostage, the worst massacre of Jews since the Second World War. Those killings were carried out with genocidal intent. Hamas has pledged to repeat them, if able, and its charter explicitly calls for the killing of Jews, not merely Israelis. As with the Holocaust, there are those who deny that the killings of October the 7th occurred, or who falsely attribute them to Israel. That denial can be countered, amongst other sources, by the meticulous report on each victim, authored by the noble Lord, Lord Roberts of Mayfair. I hope the national commemorations this week will include reference to the 7th of October. That's important, because anti-Semitism is a continuum. It didn't begin in Germany in the 1930s, and it didn't end in 1945. It has existed for at least 2 millennia, and arguably longer. The Holocaust was not a historical aberration, but an eruption of a hatred that had long been embedded across societies. Today, anti-Semitism again re-emerging, using the Gaza war as a pretext. Those who blame Israel for rising anti-Semitism ignore the historical reality that mass killings, pogroms and expulsions occurred long before Israel existed and would persist even if it did not. So what should we truly be remembering? Condemning the Nazi regime alone is both too narrow and too superficial. Research by the University College London Centre for Holocaust Education shows that Holocaust education, while essential, does not reliably reduce anti-Semitism. The UK has invested heavily in museums, memorials, archives, survivor testimony and learning centres, but these efforts have not demonstrably shifted attitudes. One reason is that Holocaust education often treats the subject as distant history. Students learn about it as a unique past atrocity with little connection to their own world. Anti-Semitism is framed as a Nazi phenomenon rather than a persistent, long-standing prejudice that still operates today. This fosters a mistaken belief that the problem ended in 1945. Students frequently come away believing that Hitler alone, or a small group of Nazi leaders, was responsible. This obscures the widespread collaboration across Europe, from officials to ordinary citizens, and the deep-rooted anti-Semitism that existed for centuries in many countries. Many students also believe that German soldiers would have been executed had they refused to participate, reinforcing the false idea that ordinary people had no moral agency. At the same time, young people increasingly encounter Holocaust misinformation and conspiracy theories on social media platforms such as YouTube and TikTok, often with more impact on them than their formal schooling. Some are influenced by historically misleading fictional portrayals, such as The Boy in Striped Pyjamas. More historically grounded films, such as the noble lady Lady Ludford referred to, such as Survivor, The Commandant's Shadow, and 1945, would provide far better educational value. Crucially, many students learn about the Holocaust without learning about anti-Semitism itself. They do not understand its history, its ideological roots, or the social and religious narratives that sustained it. They don't learn that anti-Semitism is rising sharply today, especially since the 7th of October. Nor do they grasp how far-right extremism, far-left hostility, and Islamist ideology, perhaps I should have said theology, increasingly intersect. Young people who march, calling for Israel's elimination, who persecute Jewish students, or who call for violence against Zionists, have often already received Holocaust education. Yet they frequently refuse to distinguish between Israel and Jews. The fact that similar hostility is not directed at, for example, Chinese, Iranian or Russian students for their government's actions exposes the underlying anti-Semitism. The recent report on anti-Semitism by the Noble Lord Lord Mann and Penny Mordaunt, to whom we should be grateful, that report also warns that some religious teaching in schools may perpetuate anti-Jewish beliefs. Initiatives such as the Winchester Diocese's work with Jewish communities to eliminate medieval stereotypes from religious education are welcome, and it would be encouraging to see similar programs expanded nationwide. It is fortunate for us today that the Right Reverend Prelate, the Bishop of Coventry, speaks in her maiden speech. We look forward to her many contributions to come, but today's will be especially pertinent. Another flaw in Holocaust remembrance is that it has become overwhelmingly a narrative of Jewish death rather than Jewish life. Jews are presented primarily as victims, with little attention to the vibrant culture, traditions, faith and resilience that sustain Jewish communities for thousands of years up to today. Even more problematic is the failure to link Holocaust remembrance to contemporary anti-Semitism. If never again is to have meaning, students must be taught how anti-Semitic tropes persist today in activism, conspiracy theories, and some religious or political discourse. They must understand how the term Zionism is often used as a proxy for hostility towards Jews. As the late Noble Lord Sachs observed, anti-Semitism has evolved from religious prejudice to racial ideology to hostility towards the only Jewish state and the right of Jews to self-determination. This is politically uncomfortable, but it lies at the heart of the modern problem. Nevertheless, many Holocaust remembrance events avoid mentioning Israel or the 7th of October altogether. Some councils and politicians even avoid using the word Jew when discussing Holocaust victims. This erasure weakens historical accuracy and undermines the credibility of remembrance. Another difficulty lies in the insistence by successive governments over many years that Holocaust remembrance must always be merged with other genocides. Rwanda, Bosnia and Darfur were appalling tragedies and deserve their own memorialization. But collapsing them all into a single narrative prevents meaningful understanding of why Jews were targeted, how anti-Semitism developed, and how it persists. It also risks relativizing genocide and enabling distorted claims, including those weaponized today against Jews themselves, as referred to by the noble Lord Pickles. Students are supposed to learn lessons from Holocaust education. Learning lessons. It has become overly moralized and insufficiently historical. In an effort to put the education to use, students are taught general lessons about tolerance and being bystanders, but are not given the historical knowledge or intellectual tools needed to recognize and challenge anti-Semitism in its modern forms. As survivor Anita Lasker-Wallfish, the cellist of Auschwitz, observed when giving evidence to the Commons Select Committee, a new learning centre here would not achieve anything that has not already been learned in the 80 years since the Holocaust. Lasker-Wallfish labelled the plan to build next to Parliament a completely idiotic idea and dangerous. She said, a Jew, unlike a Rwandan, is not safe anywhere now. What is needed is serious historical education and a clear understanding of anti-Semitism across time. Young people, and society more broadly, should also learn about contemporary Jewish communities, their culture, their contributions, and their place in national life. Jews should not be portrayed only as historical victims, but as active participants, which we are, in civic, intellectual, and cultural life. This is why Holocaust education requires a fundamental overhaul. Teaching a narrow, Nazi-centric narrative of historical murder has not succeeded in changing attitudes or countering modern anti-Semitism. That is also why plans for yet another Holocaust Memorial in Victoria Tower Gardens represent a missed opportunity. Its proposed learning centre appears to set in concrete, literally, many of the shortcomings already identified. It doesn't meaningfully address contemporary anti-Semitism, nor the central role of Israel in Jewish identity. If it presents a primarily British perspective on the Holocaust, it risks appearing evasive. Britain itself has a complex history in relation to its Jewish community. The massacre of 1190, the expulsion of 1290, the slow and relatively recent restoration of full civil rights and restrictive refugee policies in the 1930s and 1940s. Britain's failure to admit large numbers of Jewish refugees, its restrictions on immigration to mandatory Palestine, and its post-war treatment of displaced persons remain difficult chapters. Even the Kinder Transport and the Winton rescues were privately funded, not national, and the children admitted were separated from their parents because the children were more readily assimilable and were not a threat to job seekers. If only Israel had existed in 1938, courtesy of Britain, rather than 1948, how many thousands or millions of lives might have been saved? Against that backdrop, many in the Jewish community feel that contemporary anti-Semitism has been allowed to grow. Hate marches, biased policing, hostility on campuses, conspiracy theories spread by doctors, lecturers, teachers and students, vandalism and open calls for violence are increasingly common. Anti-Zionism has become a socially acceptable mask for anti-Semitism, even as Israel's role in Jewish safety and continuity becomes ever clearer. The Jewish community sees governments tolerating extremist rhetoric, hesitating to challenge hate preachers, imposing restrictions on Israel's self-defense, cutting itself off from security and defense exchanges, and giving credence to Hamas-derived narratives. It is therefore unsurprising that some Jews feel sceptical about official declarations of never again, about announcing yet another Holocaust memorial, while present-day anti-Semitism goes insufficiently challenged. It looks like an attempt to deflect justified criticism. We expect more than platitudes. Will the government call upon Christian and Muslim leaders to take responsibility for addressing religious teachings that perpetuate anti-Jewish ideas? Will it act decisively against extremist preaching? Will it commit to a serious reform of Holocaust education? One that drops vague moral messaging, treats the Holocaust as a uniquely Jewish genocide, and equips students to recognize anti-Semitism in all its historical and modern forms. The task of remembering has been accomplished with the recording of testimonies and the collection of data, many memorials, and 21 learning centres already existing in the UK, including the National Holocaust Centre in Newark and the Imperial War Museum galleries. But nobody has ever looked into what effect, if any, they have on those who visit and who does not visit. It is just assumed that they combat anti-Semitism. Finally, if Holocaust remembrance is to mean anything, it must affirm not only the memory of those murdered, but the legitimacy, dignity, and security of Jewish life today, including the central role of the State of Israel as a symbol of Jewish continuity and self-determination.
My noble lords, it's my privilege to make my maiden speech in this debate on the eve of Holocaust Memorial Day. First, may I express my gratitude for the kindness that I have received from your lordships on entering this house, and especially for the support, patience and care of the staff across the departments since my appointment to Coventry. Being of Jewish heritage myself, I cannot recall a time when I was not aware of the Holocaust, and I'm grateful that this was a part of our family history that was never kept from me, but held as a marker of an inhumane world, and from which I was charged to do all I could to make the world a better place. Since then, I've served in Yorkshire, Uganda, Surrey, Sussex, Durham, and now Coventry. I have a deep love of singing, especially the high notes, and running, unimpressively, and a nice glass of Sauvignon. Coming to Christian faith through youth ministry, I think I'm now qualified to say, at the risk of current cliché, that I am and have pretty much always been a faithful. My lords, I would like to focus my contribution on the importance of educating our children and young people in their religious understanding of the world as I was today, having been among the first cohort of children to journey through the GCSE curriculum with an outstanding religious studies teacher whose support remarkably continues to this day. He ensured our introduction to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam without prejudice or favour as teenagers. From this firm foundation, I was privileged to have the opportunity to study Judaism as part of my first degree, with a special interest in the literature generated by the Holocaust. I'm now honoured to serve the Diocese of Coventry, covering Warwickshire and part of the West Midlands, with Coventry City at its heart, a city that has always welcomed the refugee and the stranger, and which has benefited greatly from the rich culture, skills and contributions they have brought. Coventry knows that we cannot take for granted the understanding which builds relationships between communities, the tolerance which enriches communities through diversity, and the peace which overcomes. We know that we have to act in order to make a difference. Coventry is a city of peace and reconciliation with a strong multicultural community and interfaith network supporting each other's festivals, celebrations and challenges. This has a long history, including the welcome of 50 Kindertransport children on the eve of the Holocaust. In the decades before and after, Coventry has continued to welcome those who have faced genocide and destruction from countries around the world. The Jewish community of Coventry was founded by immigrant watchmaking families who produced the best watches in the world and contributed so much to the life and well-being of the city. They had faced hardship, persecution, oppression and pogroms, only then to face anti-Semitism in their adopted land while serving the city. The German-born Jewish mayor Siegfried Bettmann faced not only anti-Semitism, but extreme xenophobic nationalist anti-German sentiment, forcing him to retire from office and public life as World War I approached, despite his devotion to his adopted country. In this debate, my lords, we recognise that the families of every member of the Jewish community are impacted for generations with the horrors and carry the burden of anti-Semitism today, as Noble Baroness Deitch has rightly reminded us. As a bishop, whilst recognising the deep sensitivities of the present moment, I was proud to discover that there are Anglican clergy who are taking some responsibility for addressing this impact in their communities rather than remaining silent. Tomorrow, in the town of Bedworth, Nuneaton, renowned for its pride in holding the longest-held Armistice Day event, unbroken since 1921 and attracting up to 10,000 people, in which school children line the streets. This year, All Saints Bedworth are holding a special event to mark Holocaust Memorial Day for the first time. Though many schools across the nation have chosen not to mark Holocaust Memorial Day, as the Noble Lord has reminded us in recent years, recognising the deep sensitivities around the terrible and humane suffering of the people of Palestine and Gaza, Reverend Dave Pulteney has taken the decision to offer a space in his community to remember the Holocaust, to educate the children of the 3 schools in his parish, to lament, as the Psalms encourage us, but also to remember so that they are invited to build a world in which this will and can never happen again. This is especially important, as Noble Baroness Taylor has reminded us, at a time when survivors of the Holocaust who can testify as eyewitnesses reach the end of their lives, and in a culture where truth is contested and must be defended. I wish to pay tribute to those among the Jewish community here in the UK and other parts of the world who have faced dreadful persecution and attacks that can never be justified. And it is a source of sorrow to my soul that the anti-Semitism that caused such fear in our family continues, such that communities are having to be on constant alert, afraid for their children and for themselves. This cannot be right. As this House will know, Coventry Cathedral has a worldwide ministry of peace and reconciliation, founded on the very day after the destruction of the old cathedral in World War II. These relationships continue and are deeply precious to us. Just last month, we stood side by side with the President of the Federal Republic of Germany, who laid a wreath for peace in the ruins of Coventry's old cathedral. Representatives of all walks of life, all ages, and including the armed forces, shared together in gathering to mark our mutual challenges in peace building and social cohesion, to inspire a new generation to work together for peace in each of our countries. Every day at 12 noon, the cathedral prays the Coventry Litany. This is used across the world by the Cross of Nails community that flows out of the cathedral, which stands to heal the wounds of history, live well with difference and celebrate diversity, and work for communities of justice and peace. The litany begins, "All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God." And it goes on to pray for the hatred which divides nation from nation, race from race, class from class, inviting the response, Father, forgive. Interestingly, it does not say, Father, forgive them. For in 1940, the then Provost Dick Howard recognised that the hatred that had caused the destruction of his cathedral church lay not simply out there among the perceived enemy, but within us all. It is of great concern that despite all of the deeply significant efforts towards peacemaking and reconciliation, our times are more divided, not less, in these days. We know that the study of human behaviour which led to the evil of the Holocaust begins by using words, words that separate us through the language of othering, words intent on harming rather than healing. My Lord's words are our currency in this house, as they are in the wider world. Our words matter, and we can use words towards hostility or towards peace. So may this house and His Majesty's government stand for justice and kindness for all, so that every community of this nation may meet in understanding and respect, united by love of goodness, keeping far from violence and strife. May our children and the generations that follow be educated to live in peace, and may this nation find its honour and greatness in the work of peace building and reconciliation today and for all our days to come.
My Lords, it is a pleasure and a privilege to follow the Right Reverend Prelate, and I congratulate her on her excellent and poignant maiden speech. As we've heard, she joins us with a wealth of pastoral experience, both in her current role as the 10th Bishop of Coventry since 2025, and in a variety of positions before that, ranging from Burgess Hill to Bradford, Guildford to Uganda. As a severely disabled member of the House, I particularly welcome her interest in and commitment to supporting disabled people, including by running the London Marathon for MENCAP in 2022. I cannot think of a better preparation for life in your Lordship's house, where I'm afraid you will find the glacial speed with which government, any government, moves, makes having plenty of stamina a prerequisite for getting anything done. She may find that she has an advantage, though, because, as she will know, the spirit can move far more quickly than us mere humans. And that reminds me of someone who joined the movement for the ordination of women when I was at university in the early 90s, of a beautiful verse from chapter 9 of the Book of Wisdom, with which she may well be familiar. It's addressed to God, and it goes like this, and I quote, "With you is wisdom, who knows your works and was present when you made the world, and who understands what is pleasing in your sight and what is right according to your commandments. Send her forth from the holy heavens, and from the throne of your glory send her, that she may be with me and toil, for she knows and understands all things, and she will guide me wisely in my actions." My Lords, quite apart from exposing the absurdity of viewing God purely as a male, I cannot think of a more powerful affirmation of the multi-dimensional nature of God, embodying spiritually all that is beautiful in his creation of humanity, including she as much as he. My Lords, I cannot promise the Right Reverend Prelate that your Lordship's House will always do as she advises, but we look forward to benefiting from her wisdom. My Lords, there's something else that strikes me as absurd, something I find completely counterintuitive. It is our implicit construction as a society of a hierarchy of racism. Hitler could not have been clearer. His fanatical hatred of the Jews informed the 1935 Nuremberg laws, which classified Jews as, and I quote, enemies of the race-based state. That racist hatred, in turn, informed the genocidal logic of the Shoah, or Holocaust. In other words, everything revolved around race. And yet, here we are, 81 years on from the Soviet Army's liberation of Auschwitz, still mouthing, with sincerity, the mantra of never again, but not calling out the attack of the 7th of October 2023, the banning of Maccabi Tel Aviv fans, the attack on Heaton Park Synagogue, the Bondi Beach shooting, the prevention of Damien Egan in the other place from addressing pupils at a school in his own constituency, not calling these out for what they are, racist. If Hitler knew what it was about, and as my noble friend Lord Pickles reminded us, it was about race, why don't we? After all, within 20 years of the liberation of Auschwitz, your Lordship's House had passed the Race Relations Act 1965. And as noble lords will know, the Act made the promotion of hatred on the grounds of race, colour, ethnic or national origins an offence. The toxic abuse and now murderous violence being visited on our Jewish communities, such as in Manchester, clearly violates the Act, unless we are saying that it applies only to skin colour, which would be factually incorrect. This is racism, pure and simple. So why does society seem to be pretending that it's not? What sort of message are we sending to our beloved Holocaust survivors when instead of the theory of never again, they only see the beginnings of yet again? And what about impressionable young people who get most of their news, as we have heard earlier in the debate, from social media? The theme of this year's Holocaust Memorial Day is bridging generations. My lords, what sort of bridge are we building when we fail to call out racism and our police imply, as happened on camera, well, it depends on the context? Really? So it's okay to be racist if it's not about skin colour or it involves abusing Jewish people or Israel. My lords, I fear we are in danger of legitimising racist prejudice by default. As the noble Baroness the Minister said in her powerful opening remarks, the Holocaust had its roots in prejudice that began with words. And Deborah Lipstadt tells us anyone who thinks this only impacts Jews is ignoring reality. This is an attack on Western liberalism, democracy, and international security and stability. My lords, we can be sure that even as we speak in this debate today, there are those who are determined that the answer to a question posed by the Daily Telegraph, should Jews feel safe in Britain, should be a resounding no. These racists must not be allowed to achieve their goal. For the cost of surrendering to such a racist creed is far greater than just the millions spent on policing the demonstrations that have paralysed our capital city weekend after weekend. My lords, in conclusion, my childhood Jewish refugee surgeon, Hannes Weissel, fled for his life as a teenager from racism. A racism that would kill all the relatives who came to see him depart on the last train out of Prague before the Nazis closed the border. Surely we owe it to him today to take stronger action to ensure racism in all its forms is confronted with the full force of the law so that never again, never becomes yet again.
My Lords, it is an honour to follow Lord Shinquin and to have heard the brilliant speech from the Right Reverend Prelate, Bishop of Coventry, and pleased to welcome another sort of West Midlander, and also to have heard so many powerful speeches from all noble lords. And I look forward to listening to the rest of the debate, and if I may be allowed to say, particularly to my fellow West Midlander, Lord Austin, whose father was my inspirational head teacher at secondary school. My father, Jim Ramsey, was a soldier during the Second World War in a flail tank in the Westminster Dragoons. And he was part of the liberation of Bergen-Belsen in April 1945. Sadly, he died in 1990, but whilst I was growing up, he told me what he had seen there. He was deeply shocked and appalled and told us, his children, about it during the 1970s and 80s, as he wanted us to know and for us to then tell others what he had told us, making a reality, as my noble friend, the Minister was saying, about the reality of the bridging generations of this year's Holocaust Memorial Day. Survivors of the camps are dwindling to tiny numbers now, and their stories must live on through their families and through fantastic organisations such as the Holocaust Education Trust and the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust, to which I pay tribute. I share my father's conviction in the importance of bearing witness by continuing to repeat those accounts of the men and women who saw what had happened in the camps. This is an extract kindly given to me by the Westminster Dragoons Association, taken from a report of the concentration camp at Belsen, Germany, by a fellow member of the regiment, to my father. And these are quotes now. Belsen is a small village 11 miles from Keller, which is in the province of Hanover. About a mile south of Belsen, there is a concentration camp. The conditions at Belsen camp were ghastly. Obviously, it was used as a place where the prisoners could be exterminated slowly and with least trouble to the Reich. This extermination took place in the form of slow starvation. The rations were a bowl of swede or turnip soup per person per day, and a loaf of rye bread between 12 persons every week. Thus, the bare minimum was given, a minimum which would not allow anyone to die quickly of starvation, but which would make him or her gradually waste away into a living skeleton. When this happened, death either followed by typhus or mere collapse. It was reckoned that at least 400 persons had died every day. When the camp was first entered by British troops, they were met by a sight which we in England would think impossible of a civilised nation such as Germany. All over the grounds of the camp lay the bodies of what had once been men and women. It was impossible to miss seeing bodies. 2 over there, 9 in front of the barbed wire, a large pile of 40 outside of one of the huts. It was hard to walk without stepping on them as they lay on the ground. They were there because, to begin with, the prisoners were too weak to move their comrades away to bury them, and secondly, because the SS guards were either too lazy to move them or because there were too many to move, and as they were buried, more died. In one part of the camp, there was a large pit. It was 80 feet deep, and in the bottom there was a mass of corpses, half buried with earth. It's said that the pit had been 20 feet deeper, but that the last consignment of bodies had filled up that 20 feet. At this moment, Hungarian guards are digging another pit for those prisoners whom our doctors know will shortly die from typhus. Today is the 25th of April 1945. The British have been at the camp for almost a week. They buried 1,200 people yesterday and 1,700 the day before, and there will be more to bury tomorrow. But things will gradually become better as the food we are giving them builds them up. It is quite probable that many of the people in England who read accounts of this concentration camp, despite the fact that there are photographs to prove it, will think that the whole thing is vastly exaggerated and that it is just a move in the effort to foster the feeling of hate against the Germans, a feeling which admittedly the average Englishman does not like to show. He believes in sport and fair play. And, quote, anyhow, how in the world could another country do such terrible things when we don't do them? Also, we haven't seen with our own eyes, so we don't believe, and it's better forgotten anyhow. The final line of this report, of which I've only read extracts from, and I apologise to members for how upsetting it is, but bearing in mind the words of the noble lady, Baroness Ludford, it seems appropriate to read it today. So the final line, written by that soldier, is, do you think it's better forgotten? I don't know who he was addressing those to, but I think that he agreed, obviously, with my father. That anxiety that the testimony of returning soldiers would either not be believed or not passed on to future generations was shared by my father, as well as the utter horror of what he had witnessed. How dismaying it was, therefore, to learn from the Equalities and Human Rights Commission's October 2020 report that the Labour Party had been dealing so inadequately with anti-Semitism under its previous leadership that complaints of individual members sharing Holocaust denial, for example, on social media, hadn't even been investigated. Keir Starmer, when he became leader, was determined to root out anti-Semitism in the party. As part of this vital endeavour, I was asked to lead the work needed to address the recommendations made in the Commission's damning report. Terrible that such work was necessary, but what a fitting opportunity for me to honour my father. The EHRC had identified political interference in the handling of anti-Semitism complaints, so I had the task of developing an independent complaint system from scratch. I also established a proper process to engage with Jewish communal stakeholders and oversaw the devising and delivery of a programme of anti-Semitism awareness training for use across the party for all staff and parliamentarians. I worked closely with the Jewish labour movement, led so effectively at that time by my now noble friends Lord Katz and Baroness Anderson of Stoke-on-Trent, as well as with Dame Louise Ellman, Rebecca Feiler and Peter Mason and Adam Langelben, plus Danny Stone of the Anti-Semitism Policy Trust, Adrian Cohen, then of the Jewish Leadership Council, Marie van der Zyl, then President of the British Board of Deputies, and her successor, Phil Rosenberg. I also came to hugely respect Dave Rich and all those at the Community Security Trust, and obviously that is ongoing for the reasons that others noble lords have mentioned today about the current role of the Community Security Trust. Under Keir's leadership, and with the support and challenge of all those wonderful people, the Labour Party succeeded in turning things round. The EHRC lifted their legal enforcement action against the party, and no longer did the chief rabbi find himself needing to intervene publicly in the general election, as he had done in 2019. But of course, anti-Semitism is still very much with us today, as we all saw last October with the horrific attack on worshippers at the Heaton Park Synagogue in Manchester on Yom Kippur. So, the Holocaust Memorial Day retains its vital role in ensuring that we all remember, and more than this, that we all do whatever we can to tackle anti-Semitism wherever we see it.
Very good. My Lords, can I begin by saying what a pleasure it is to follow the noble lady Baroness Ramsay of Walheath and thank her for all the work that she has done to combat anti-Semitism. Can I also thank Baroness Taylor of Stevenage for arranging this debate and for commemorating so kindly those that witnessed the events we speak of but passed away this year. A third congratulations to the Right Reverend Prelate, the Bishop of Coventry, on her excellent maiden speech. And I'd like to thank her for her recognition of the multi-generational trauma experienced by those of us of Jewish heritage. A very significant thing in my view. My Lords, memorializing the Holocaust has never been more important. We know that this grotesque event was based on an ancient hatred, and yet the events since October 7th have produced a level of anti-Semitism that few of us could really have imagined in this country. Jews in the UK, as has been mentioned by Baroness Ludford and Lord Shinquin, can no longer attend school or synagogue without security protection. Israeli football fans have been banned from watching their team play. Members of the other house have been stopped from attending schools in their constituencies, and there has been deadly anti-Semitic terrorist attacks on our streets. The open statements about killing Jews and the demonization and vilification of Israel have been normalized to a rather terrifying extent. I'd like to focus my brief remarks on the term genocide, which was the basis of the Holocaust and is now a term, as Lord Pickles mentioned, which is being deliberately weaponized in some quarters in order to inflame a new version of hatred against Jews and Israel. For Jews to be falsely accused of this crime has been one of the most painful aspects of this war of words. Let's look at the origins of the term genocide. It was invented by the Polish lawyer Raphael Lemkin during World War II and entered public discourse for the first time when it was included in the indictments against the Nazi defendants at Nuremberg. And what is genocide? Lemkin's definition was that it is the extermination of racial and religious groups in order to destroy particular races and classes of people. The Genocide Convention of 1948 defines a term more broadly, but the key is the intent to destroy a racial or religious group. As we know, the Nazis devised their final solution in 1942 in a state-sponsored, institutionalized program to exterminate the entire Jewish population of occupied Europe, which totaled 9 million people at that time. They managed to kill 6 million of them. Now let's contrast this with the alleged genocide in Gaza, which was a war of self-defense, Israel's sovereign right, following the atrocity of October 7th and the kidnapping of 251 hostages, the worst pogrom since World War II, as mentioned by the noble lady Baroness Deitch. Whether you agree or disagree with Israel's conduct of the war, there was never an intent to exterminate or eliminate any group or race. Israel's war is against a terrorist group pledged to destroy it. It has nothing to do with the idea of genocide. Furthermore, Hamas bears responsibility for casualties in Gaza by refusing to release hostages and embedding themselves and their weaponry within the civilian infrastructure. So it is vital that the Holocaust is remembered for its unique evil. The public need to be reminded of what constitutes a genocide. Understanding the term might prevent its misuse for political ends. We are in dangerous waters now in terms of Holocaust denial and distortion, as opponents of Israel seek to undermine the unprecedented character of this event with false equivalence. And this must begin in schools. As we lose living witnesses to this darkest history, we cannot afford a growing vacuum of knowledge in schools about the Holocaust, or worse still, for it to be replaced with an ideology that questions it. So I urge the noble lady, the Minister, to devote even more resource to ensure that the public understand the Holocaust, what constitutes a genocide, and how fragile societies can become in the face of anti-Semitism and racism. By doing so, we can make sure it never happens again.
Good speech.
My Lords, it's a great pleasure to follow that brilliant speech by the Noble Lord Massey, and I want to start by saying it was a privilege to listen to the maiden speech by the Right Reverend Prelate, the Bishop of Coventry. I thought that was a fantastic speech. And I want to say this. In March 1939, a 10-year-old Jewish boy in a town called Ostrava, in what was then Czechoslovakia, was woken up in the middle of the night, and he got out of bed and looked out of the window, and he saw the German troops marching into the town square. It was the day that Hitler had invaded. And a few days later, he was put on a train by his mum and teenage sisters. It was the last time he'd see them, because they were eventually rounded up, sent first to a ghetto, then to Theresienstadt, before being murdered in Treblinka in October 1942. But he came to the UK. He was able only to speak 3 words of English, which were hot, cross and bun. But he grew up to become the youngest grammar school head teacher in the country, educated tens of thousands of people, including my friend the noble lady Baroness Ramsay of Walheath. But much more importantly, from my point of view, he brought up 4 kids, of whom I'm the second. And in later life, he worked with Black and Asian communities in Dudley to establish the Racial Equality Council. He raised funds for the Holocaust Educational Trust. He spoke at their events. I want to start by paying tribute to them and their work. We've heard in this debate references to statistics about Holocaust education. They're worrying figures, that's true, but HET, who engage with schools all year round, they report that across their programs they're working with hundreds more schools than in 2023, before the barbaric attacks on Israel by Hamas, and that this will increase still further with their new Testimony 360 programme. I went last week to listen, as did a number of members of your Lordship's House present here this evening, to listen to the brilliant historian Simon Sebag Montefiore deliver an absolutely riveting lecture at their annual parliamentary event. And he said that teaching about the Holocaust and anti-Semitism is more vital than ever, as the last witnesses are passing away, whilst Holocaust denial, distortion, inversion, and what I would call perversion, now joined by eliminationist anti-Semitism, have made an alarming comeback. And those are the points that I'm going to focus on today. But first I want to pay tribute, as others have done, to the survivors who have died this year, in particular Manfred Goldberg, Eve Kugler, with whom I travelled to Poland for March of the Living in 2018, along with the Noble Lord Pickles, and got to know well subsequently. And indeed, of course, the Noble Lord Shinquin, who was with us, present with us on that same trip, and Harry Ulmer, who died last week. Many members of your Lordship's House will have known Manfred Goldberg. I thought he was a great man, a real hero, survived the death camps, came to the UK after the war, married Shari, brought up three sons, made a huge contribution to our country in so many ways. Now, he was absolutely appalled by the increase in anti-Semitism that we've seen since Israel was attacked on October the 7th. I want to pay tribute to the Community Security Trust for the brilliant work that they do, led by Sir Gerald Ronson and Mark Gardner. We saw how important their work is on Yom Kippur last year, when 2 Jewish men, Adrian Dolby and Melvin Kravitz, were killed when an Islamist extremist terrorist attacked Heaton Park Synagogue in Manchester. Now, this wasn't a random attack on a shopping centre or in the street. Jewish people were attacked at a synagogue because they're Jews. Murderous, brutal racism. Then we saw a court case in which Islamist extremists were convicted of planning to murder Jewish people at schools, businesses, synagogues, and even a march against racism, in what the police said would have been the deadliest attack in UK history. Now, my lords, these attacks, they don't happen in isolation. A recent YouGov survey suggests more than 1 in 5 British people now hold entrenched anti-Semitic views, twice the level that it was 4 years ago. The CST's research shows that anti-Semitic incidents are running at record levels. Home Office statistics show that Jewish people are 10 times more likely to be the victims of religious hate crime than any other group. On October the 7th, at the same time as terrorists were murdering and kidnapping civilians and committing the greatest massacre of Jewish people since the Holocaust, people here in the UK celebrated on the streets of Britain. Weekly marches then made central London and other city centres no-go areas for Jewish people. I went to watch some of these marches. You don't see any banners calling for peace, for hostages to be released, for a two-state solution, but there were plenty comparing Israel. This is the distortion Simon Sebag Montefiore was talking about. There were plenty comparing Israel to Nazi Germany, its leaders to Hitler, Gaza to the Holocaust. They say the victims have become the oppressors, that Jews are doing what the Nazis did. Even before the conflict, Gaza was called a new Warsaw ghetto. My lords, what could be more offensive? What could be more offensive than routinely accusing a country built by Holocaust survivors, the only democracy and equal free society in the whole of the Middle East, of genocide, crimes against humanity, or committing another Holocaust? These disgusting comparisons are designed to demonise and delegitimise Israel, to undermine the very reason for its existence, which is as a safe haven for the Jewish people. Protesters demand Palestine stretch from the river to the sea, which would mean the destruction of Israel and the murder of its citizens. They chant for Israel's destruction, the death to the IDF, even on the stage at Glastonbury, broadcast by the BBC, or to globalise the Intifada. Last month, unbelievably, extremists in Birmingham paraded behind a banner saying one solution, Intifada revolution, and the Hamas symbol, the symbol of a prescribed banned terrorist group. Yet the police did nothing about this. The Intifadas were terror attacks with suicide bombings, ramming people with cars and attacking them with knives. Exactly what happened in Manchester. Now, it's good that the Met and the Greater Manchester Police have finally said they'll start prosecuting people who make these statements, but this has been happening since October the 7th. And I think we need assurances that other forces will be required to do the same, and that people who do this will be prosecuted with the same speed and determination of those who incite other forms of racism, as we saw, for example, after the Southport attack. What have we seen over the last few years? Jewish kids attacked on the way to school, students targeted at university, Jewish patients hidden their identity when going to hospital, synagogues smeared with feces, homes daubed with swastikas, businesses attacked just because their owners are Jewish. As the chief rabbi said, this is a tidal wave of Jew hatred. In Bristol, a Jewish MP banned from visiting a school in his constituency. It turned out, extraordinarily, that the Inclusion and Diversity Coordinator of the trust running the school had praised Hamas's October the 7th massacre as, quote, heroes fighting for justice. In Birmingham, Jewish people banned by the police from going to a football match. Here in London, a mob gathers each week to scream abuse at the staff and customers of a restaurant owned by Jewish people. Now, of course, people have the right to protest in a democracy, but not to harass Jewish people outside restaurants or synagogues. These people should be arrested and prosecuted. These incidents should be dealt with much more seriously in future. Now, my lords, what is the context in which all this is taking place? Well, first, Parliament debates Israel more than any other issue. Not just more than any other international issue, more than any other issue. During the conflict, Parliament debated Israel and Gaza 3 times more than the NHS, crime, poverty, or immigration. How can it be that MPs spend more time on a conflict thousands of miles away, which many of them know, if we're honest, I'm not pretending to be an expert on this, but many of them I think know probably not very much about it and can do even less to solve it than the schools or the hospitals in their constituencies that they're responsible for. In Sudan, famine has killed 500,000 children, 10 million people are starving, tens of thousands of civilians murdered in just a few days. The UK is the UN Security Council penholder, and yet we hardly ever discuss it. Two weeks ago, on the very first day back after the New Year, there was a statement which was supposed to be on the Middle East and North Africa. But MPs, many of them queued up to speak only about Israel and Gaza. MP falsely accused Israel of the worst crimes possible, but the government concluded that Israel is not committing a genocide. So I would like to hear ministers start to push back when backbench MPs or others claim that it is. We see, I think, the same obsession, bias and inaccuracies at the BBC too. For example, when the government concluded that Israel was not committing a genocide, the BBC pretty much buried the news. When the UN said it might be, it dominated every bulletin for days. The IRA definition of anti-Semitism, the official definition that the government subscribes to, says that demonising Israel, singling it out for criticism, holding it to standards never applied to other countries, which is clearly what is happening. It says that these are examples of anti-Semitism. And all this matters, I think, because the obsessive demonisation of the world's only Jewish state obviously drives hostility towards people who are identified with it, which is the vast majority of Jewish people. And this is a large part, I think, of what drives anti-Semitism in the UK. Now, I think people can't really promise to oppose anti-Semitism, but then support boycotts, sanctions or embargoes that would prevent Israel from defending its Jewish citizens. People say that there is no place for anti-Semitism, but I think this has become meaningless when it is running at record levels, when Parliament and the BBC are fueling it, and when the authorities are not doing nearly enough to deal with it. Now, I think we need to be much more robust in standing up for our values. I think that, look, the world is, migration is now a permanent feature of global life. In just 4 years, 3.5 million people came to live in Britain. Some will have come from places where anti-Semitism is more common than in the UK. The Holocaust is rarely taught, not understood, or by many, probably not even believed. So I think it is crucial that Holocaust education is increased and expanded and improved. I think we have to be clear, we have to say that if people hate Jews or think Israel should not be allowed to exist, they should be prevented from coming to Britain or staying here to live. I think the government and the police must clamp down much harder on extremist preachers, making hate speeches in mosques. I think that NHS staff or university lecturers responsible for racism should be sacked. I don't think that hate marches can be allowed any longer to take over our streets every week. I think the government should change the law to curb them if necessary. No more empty promises or meaningless platitudes. Taking anti-Semitism much more seriously and dealing with it much more robustly is not just a matter of standing up for the Jewish community, vital though that is. It is fundamentally about what it means to be British. I think living in the UK means believing in democracy, equality, freedom, fairness and tolerance. I think that's what our country stands for. I think heroes like Baroness Ramsay's late father, I think that's exactly what he and his comrades in the war were fighting for. I think those values define what it means to be British. And this is the final point that I want to make. Of course, Holocaust Memorial Day is an opportunity to learn about history's greatest crimes and pay our respects to its victims, like my dad's mum and sisters, of course. But expressing our sympathy for people murdered 80 years ago is not enough. Holocaust Memorial Day is the opportunity to dedicate ourselves, especially those of us in positions of leadership and responsibility, not to stand silently by or to mouth empty promises or meaningless platitudes, but to do all we can to fight hatred and prejudice and stand up for the victims of racism today.
My Lords, it is a privilege, somewhat daunting privilege, to follow the Noble Lord Austin in another passionate and erudite speech that he's just given. I too would like to congratulate the Right Reverend Prelate, the Bishop of Coventry, on an outstanding maiden speech. It's clear the huge impact she's going to have and bring to this House. And I'd like to thank the Noble Lady, the Minister, for leading this debate so candidly and emotionally. I should declare my interest as a member of the Holocaust Memorial Foundation. I didn't get a chance to say this last week in ping-pong on the Holocaust Memorial Bill, but I would really like to pay tribute to my noble friend, Lord Pickles, for the huge amount of work that he is putting into the Holocaust Memorial. He and his co-chair, Ed Balls, are extraordinary to watch at work together, and we're incredibly grateful for the work that you do, my friend. It is an honour to speak in this debate after such emotional, personal, erudite speeches. My Lords, I always feel a real fraud when I talk about the Holocaust. I am a fraud because I am not Jewish. I did not come to Holocaust education and commemoration because of family and community links. My journey to this debate was far more prosaic. In 2015, the then Prime Minister, David Cameron, asked me to serve on the Holocaust Memorial Foundation to bring my digital experience to the project's objectives, not to only be a physical memorial and learning centre, but to bring the content and the experience to everyone in the country. On the premise that when your Prime Minister asks you to serve, you should say yes, I did, without really understanding what I was committing to at all. And so my personal Holocaust education journey began. I didn't learn about the Holocaust at school. I went to a Catholic convent whose religious education consisted of rote learning the Bible, I'm afraid. There was no Holocaust Memorial Day when I was growing up. So I only really began to learn the true horror of the murder of over 6 million men, women and children, Jewish men, women and children, I should say, through my involvement in the Holocaust Memorial Foundation. I too had the privilege of my life of meeting Manfred Goldberg, and I would say watching and experiencing his testimony on Testimony 360. If you haven't had a chance to experience it yet, my Lords, I would really recommend it, because he's there, in front of you, as if he was in front of you physically. And we're so lucky that Manfred and the other survivors were so brave to give their testimony. My journey has involved visiting various museums and learning centres around the world, but it has also involved deep personal introspection. I firstly needed to learn the facts. As the Noble Lady Baroness Deitch has pointed out, it's hugely important that we understand the overall historical context. We need to feel empathy for the heartbreak that this most atrocious of human acts has brought. But as many have said this afternoon, I know I cannot possibly fully comprehend what that multi-generational trauma must feel like. I know enough to know I simply do not know. And then, my Lords, my learning journey has taken me to looking inwards and asking myself some very uncomfortable questions, questions that others have alluded to this afternoon. Would I have turned a blind eye as anti-Semitism set in again in Germany in the 20s and 30s? Would I have just put up the equivalent of the greengrocer's notice, as Václav Havel sets out? Would I have opted for a quiet life? Or worse still, would I have joined in? And sadly, my Lords, that learning journey continues, because today, as we bridge the generations, as Holocaust Memorial Day tomorrow asks us to think about, I don't think that you can ask those questions in the hypothetical. I'm afraid I think we have to ask those questions in the present tense. So for me, Holocaust Memorial Day and Holocaust education in the round forced me to ask myself, am I turning a blind eye? As the noble Lord Austin has just really challenged us. Am I standing up for my Jewish friends as they question whether the UK is safe for them to live in today? Am I going with the populist flow? Or am I fighting anti-Semitism as only a small minority of people did in the run-up to the Second World War in Germany? Holocaust Memorial Day calls on all of us never to forget, but as many have said today, that is only the beginning of the journey of learning. To truly bridge the generations, to learn from and not repeat the Holocaust, we have to learn to act, not just learn. I do fear, as many have said, that we're living in a time when people are scared. The world order is shifting. Mark Carney encapsulated it completely brilliantly last week, I felt. He set out so eloquently how the rules-based world order that I've been lucky enough to grow up in is shattering. People across the world are scared. They're angry and they're looking for easy solutions. History teaches us that that is very fertile ground for anti-Semitism. So, my lords, my involvement in the Holocaust Memorial Foundation has taught me, as others have said, you win and lose this battle day in and day out. It requires all of us, in whatever role we play, in public and in private, to recognise how easy it is for populist rhetoric to turn into anti-Semitic actions. And to prevent history repeating itself yet again, we all need to stand up and be counted. Today, tomorrow on Holocaust Memorial Day, and I'm afraid, my lords, every day.
Well done, very good.
Well done.
Very honoured to follow that excellent speech, and may I take a chance to acknowledge the very brilliant maiden speech that we heard earlier as well. I'm intending to speak quite briefly on a subject because this subject has been very fully covered already, and I'm sure nobody will mind that. I first of all should declare an interest. I'm a member of the APG for British Jews, although I'm not Jewish, but I believe that it's really important for all British citizens to show their support for each other in the face of anti-Semitism. This needs to be offered with humility and a sense of how little, certainly for me, how little I know. I haven't experienced the emotions that my Jewish friends have experienced, or the loss that they've experienced. I've read about the Holocaust, I understand it to that extent, but I don't have the deep empathy that so many of you in this room have. But what I do have is a feeling of absolute fury when I think about children not being able to go to their schools, or concealing their identity, or having schools having to be looking like fortified camps because of fear that something may happen to the children, or they may be attacked. Or indeed, Jewish friends I know who are beginning to have discussions about whether this is much of a country to live in anymore, whether it's a safe country for Jewish people to live in. I was absolutely horrified to hear some of these discussions, but this is where it seems to be going. Our country, my country and our country, is surely much better than this. And our Jewish people, our Jewish fellow citizens who have contributed so much to this country and who continue to do so, are entitled to expect much better of the whole country and expect our vigorous, really vigorous and committed support. Religious hate crime, I'm afraid, is growing significantly. We might try and believe otherwise, but it's not true. It's not just directed at Jewish people. There are significant numbers of hate crimes directed at the Muslim community as well, and it's important to remember that. But when you come down to the intensity of number of hate crimes per 10,000 of people, the Jewish population suffers that 3 or 4 times more than the Muslim community does. So, although others do suffer from hate crimes, it's the Jewish community that is the most heavily struck. when HM government takes a clear stance against hate crime and anti-Semitism, we have to acknowledge that they do, but equally well we have to say that it's not working very well. Anti-Semitism is advancing, and our Jewish fellow citizens don't feel that they are subject to a pervasive threat, or that their life in many cases is being made miserable as a result of these threats and anti-Semitism. Notwithstanding what HM government is already doing, I believe it could and should go much further and start by setting hard, measurable targets to reduce and stamp out hate crime by specific target dates and be willing to be held to account against them. What's measured generally gets done, is my experience in life. Even in this very serious matter, I think we need to be tough with ourselves, not sanctimonious but tough about what can be done. The best tribute we can offer, in my mind, to the horrors of the Holocaust is to act vigorously now, to fight against anti-Semitism and to keep on fighting until we win.
My Lords, I was born a Jew and I'm proud to be a Jew, albeit a non-practising one. It's been an amazing debate and I want to pay tribute. I didn't think I'd be paying tribute to a right Reverend Prelate, a Jewish one, an amazing speech. And there has been some amazing speeches during this debate. I want to give some experience of my life. We were Dutch Jews on one side of our family. My father changed the name because he wanted to sell more insurance, and he was good at that. So I suppose that was a good move. Where we lived in the East End was I never experienced any anti-Semitism. It was a mixed street, mainly Jews. Synagogue was round the corner. Rabbi was round the other side. It was we had I think a good upbringing. When I was 15 years old, I was a precocious reader, and I came across a book.
His name is actually on the list, so if he would actually keep his remarks to short. Your name's not on the list to speak.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Your name is not on the list to speak, but if you would like to keep your remarks short, that would be okay.
I will endeavour to keep my remarks short. I didn't realise I had to put my name down. Anyway, when I was 15 years old, I came across a book, The Scourge of the Swastika, which ironically was written by, I think, the Lord Russell of Liverpool's grandfather, and that taught me a lot about what goes on. Bearing in mind the strictures I've got, that I've got to keep my remarks limited, I will do. I think that this is a really important debate. I think the people who've made the contributions about us needing to do more to ensure that anti-Semitism remains something that we fight against, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, my Lord. It's a pleasure to follow the noble Lord, and I wish to welcome the Bishop of Coventry. I did take the opportunity to visit Coventry Cathedral, both the old original one and the new one, and I do believe you'll make a fantastic contribution to the Lordship's house, and also to Baroness Taylor to Stevenage. As many noble lords have already said, that was an excellent introduction to this debate. And Baroness Ludford, the noble lady mentioned a couple of films, and she made a very valid point about the certification of those films, Schindler's List and Nuremberg. Nuremberg film is worth going to see, my lords, not least to see Britain's Attorney General, Sir Harvey Shawcross, skewering Goering in the dispatch box. I can recommend one film for lordships to see that really gives an indication of what actually happened in the Holocaust. It's called The Grey Zone in 2001.
It tells the story of the 12th Soda Commando October uprising in 1944 in Auschwitz. And that is certificated 18 because that, my lords, is a little bit more graphic. There is a large Jewish community in Manchester, and as you probably tell from my accent, my family come from Manchester. I come from a council estate just south of Manchester, and I remember growing up in the 1970s. We had a lot of veterans from the Second World War and the First World War, and I particularly remember my mother, who remembers the Manchester Blitz, and hiding away in the garden in very dark Anderson shelters, remembers the sound of German engines, Daimler-Benz engines, as they went over to bomb Manchester and the Manchester docks. But she also told me about the propaganda that the Germans used to send out. Germany calling, Lord Haw Haw. The Germans knew where the Jewish community were in Manchester. And for those of you who don't know Manchester, just on the suburbs, both in North Manchester and South Manchester, a place called Didsbury, there is a large Jewish community, and indeed a synagogue. You could call it a South Manchester synagogue as opposed to North Manchester. Heaton Park, and William Joyce, Lord Haw Haw, used to say exactly where they were because there was a tram terminus, and they said, "We've got you marked out, we know where you are." And as a coincidence, my mother worked for a company called Granada Television. And this is where I pay tribute to Baroness Ramsay of Small Heath and the story of her father and the Second World War and the liberation of Belsen, because the Baron Sidney Bernstein was a member of the Lordship's House. So he set up Granada TV studios in Manchester, but his wartime service was documenting exactly what happened in Belsen, and he became a fellow of the British Film Institute. And I remember my mother telling me what a good man he was. I never met him, but I've read up on him. But the films that he produced then were specifically made so that future generations could say that this did happen, this could not be denied. And I remember, and you can look this up on YouTube, my lords, but I remember seeing a member of the Cheshire Regiment. It was a sergeant. He was being filmed, and he was asked the question, "Where are you, who are you, and what is happening?" And in the background there was a mass pit, and SS prisoners were putting the bodies into this pit, as he described in an accent not dissimilar to myself, that he was Sergeant Smith from Cheshire, and I'm in Belsen concentration camp, and what he witnessed here is unbelievable, and those were his words. We also had the privilege last year of also meeting Mervyn Kirsch, who was a Jewish soldier fighting in the British Army, and although he didn't liberate on the exact day of the liberation of Belsen, he came in about a week later and he witnessed the clear-up. He looked at how the medical services saved as many lives as possible, and it was wonderful to meet Mervyn. In the same room was a Holocaust survivor who was liberated by the British Army in Belsen, and she subsequently married a British soldier, and she thought British soldiers and the British Army was the best army in the world, and my lords, who can argue with that? But I remember speaking to Mervyn last year, and he said something to me. His family had escaped from Germany into Holland and then to the United Kingdom, into Britain, the safety of Britain, and he had volunteered into the British Army and ended up going to liberate Europe. But he said to me that in the 1930s his father knew what was coming with the Holocaust, and he said to Mervyn as a very young man, he says, "If they land on the south coast of England, we need to head to Wales, we need to head to Anglesey, and we'll get ourselves to America." Well, standing there in the third decade of the 21st century, hearing that memory of a very young man just reminds us of what where we are, and I'm afraid to say, here we are again. But moving to the future, noble lords have mentioned about the fantastic work that the Holocaust Educational Trust has done by Karen Pollock and her colleagues in reaching over 100,000 people each year, ensuring the lessons of the Holocaust are never forgotten. Each year, tens of thousands of young people hear the powerful testimony of Holocaust survivors and of their descendants. Survivors travel across the country to talk to many schools. Tens of thousands of young people have stood on the site where around 1 million Jewish men, women and children were murdered through the Lessons of Auschwitz project. They return as Holocaust Educational Trust ambassadors, committed to sharing what they have witnessed. More than 1,000 teachers are trained each year in how best to teach this challenging and sensitive subject. Testimony 360 is a digital project transforming how the Holocaust is taught and understood. Using AI-powered search technology, thousands of students have already come face-to-face with survivors, engaging in natural language conversations as if they were in the room together. Paired with virtual reality headsets, students can also explore key sites connected to each survivor's testimony, all without leaving the classroom. Remembrance is no longer enough, though. Action must be taken to counter anti-Semitism here today. This year, we mark Holocaust Memorial Day with increasingly heavy hearts, just months after the deadly attack at Heaton Park Synagogue and weeks after the barbaric attack at Bondi Beach. Since October the 7th, 2023, anti-Semitism hatred has intensified, rhetoric has spilled into violence, and what was once whispered is now said openly and proudly. We have seen in a protests outside a Jewish-owned restaurant and a Jewish member of Parliament being barred from visiting a local school and visitors to a London synagogue forced to walk through a gauntlet of hate. It is no longer enough to remember the past. It is no longer enough to say that anti-Semitism is not acceptable. Action must be taken to tackle anti-Semitism and foster social cohesion. Holocaust Educational faces significant challenges, but the Holocaust Educational Trust is reaching more young people now than ever before. Today, young people arrive in classrooms with views shaped by social media trends rather than evidence. Some teachers are anxious about their communities and to respond when a Holocaust survivor shares their testimony, fearing a backlash from parents, and survivors themselves are being asked to navigate questions about contemporary conflict just because they are Jewish. In response, the Holocaust Educational Trust is expanding its work in classrooms across the country. We are now working with hundreds more schools than in 2023, with barbaric terrorist attack on Israel by Hamas, and our reach will continue growth and new programmes are ruled out. At the Holocaust Educational Trust, they know that the Holocaust cannot and must not be taught in isolation. The anti-Semitism that culminated in the Holocaust was not invented by the Nazis. It was rooted in 2,000 years of anti-Jewish hatred. Likewise, we know that anti-Semitism did not end in 1945. It has continued to evolve and to adapt right up to the present day. My Lords, it is up to us all to make a stand against anti-Semitism.
My Lords, before I start, I'd like to congratulate the Bishop of Coventry for her moving and very illuminating maiden speech. My Lords, I rise today on a Holocaust Memorial Day with a profound sense of solemnity and responsibility. This is not merely a day of remembrance, but a day of moral reckoning. One that calls upon us all, year after year, to confront the darkest capacities of the humanity and to reaffirm our shared commitment to ensure that such horrors are never repeated. Holocaust was a heinous crime, an atrocity of the worst kind in human history. 6 million Jewish men, women, and children were systematically murdered alongside millions of others, including Roma, disabled people, political dissidents, and members of the LGBT community. This was not an accident of war, but a deliberate and industrialized attempt to eradicate an entire people. We must continue to remind the world that such an inhumanity to humanity must never be allowed to happen again. We also remember that many of those responsible were ultimately brought to justice. That matters, my lords. Accountability matters. It reaffirms our fundamental principle that no state, no government, and no individual is beyond moral or legal judgment. However, my lords, Holocaust Memorial Day also invites us to reflect broadly on the lessons of the history. It asked us not only to remember one atrocity, but also to recognize and remember others, committed across different times, different continents, and cultures, so that memory itself may serve as a safeguard against repetition. In that spirit, my lords, in that spirit, we must acknowledge other grave injustices that scar our collective past. One such example is the Amritsar massacre of 13th of April 1919, when hundreds of unarmed men, women, and children were brutally killed at the Jallianwala Bagh. They had gathered there peacefully, yet they were met with indiscriminate and lethal force. This was a profound moral failure and a tragedy that continues to resonate, particularly for British Indians and the wider Commonwealth. There have been other atrocities across the world as well, such as Rwanda, Srebrenica, Cambodia, and My Lai, and many more. Each reminds us that the promise of never again must be renewed continually, not spoken once and then just forgotten. My lords, remembrance without reflection is hollow. Reflection without responsibility is incomplete. Acknowledging historical wrongs does not diminish a nation, or rather, it strengthens its moral standing and demonstrates the courage to confront uncomfortable truths. In reflecting on the lessons of the Holocaust, we are also invited to look with honesty and humility at our history. Amritsar remains a source of deep sadness, particularly for those whose families were directly affected. In that context, my lords, in that context, may I respectfully ask my noble friend, the Minister, whether His Majesty's government has any plan to offer a formal apologies for Amritsar massacre in a recognition of hundreds of innocent men, women, and children who were mowed down on that tragic day. Such an apology would not undo the past, but it would carry a profound symbolic weight and reaffirm our enduring commitment to justice, to humanity, and to historical truth. Thank you, my lords.
My lords, I'm grateful for the opportunity to say a few words in the gap and to pay tribute to the many excellent speeches that we've heard in this debate, including particularly the admirable maiden speech of the Right Reverend Prelate. My lords, as I've mentioned before, my grandmother was killed in Auschwitz, and I was partly brought up by an aunt who not only survived Auschwitz, but as she told me, survived being put into the gas chamber when that evil and macabre operation was aborted because on that occasion the system malfunctioned. So this subject is very real for me. Last week in the debate on the Holocaust Memorial, my noble friend, or the noble Baroness Teach, she is also, I hope, my friend for whom I have great respect, said that the Nazis intended to kill 6 million men, women and children. As I told her afterwards, I almost intervened during her speech because she was wrong. The Nazis intended, as my noble friend Lord Massey has said, to kill many, many more. One of the most chilling documents of the Holocaust, which I'm sure many of your lordships have seen, is the map which was in front of the participants of the infamous conference at Wannsee in 1942, which planned the details of the final solution. That map shows every country in Europe and the number of Jews which the conference estimated that country contained. Every country in Europe, not only the countries which the Nazis then occupied or planning to occupy. It also showed the neutral countries in Europe. And of course, my lords, it also showed this country. Those of us who are familiar with the events of the first 3 weeks of Churchill's premiership know that an argument raged as to whether terms should be sought from Hitler. An argument raged in the War Cabinet itself for 10 days. And there is no doubt at all that had it not been for Winston Churchill, such terms would have been sought and a deal would have been done much the same as the deal which Marshal Pétain and the French did just at that time. And my lords, had that happened, even if by some miracle your lordship's house would have survived or been revived in the intervening years, I would be very unlikely to have been here to contribute to this debate today. So I would be in the forefront of those who insist that the Holocaust must be remembered, even if the anti-Semitism which brought it about was just a matter of history. But of course we know that it isn't. A few months ago I attended the funeral of Adrian Dalby, one of the victims of the Heaton Park attack. It was, as your lordships would expect, a very moving event. It was an event which of a kind which I never expected to attend, and which I never hope to attend again. But unless our efforts, the efforts of our government and our society, are increased and stepped up, I fear that I may. Not long after October the 7th, I was invited to give a talk at a synagogue in central London. And then I was told by the organisers that they'd been advised that it wouldn't be safe for that event to take place. And rather meekly, I accepted that advice. And the event was postponed, although it did take place at a later date. But looking back on it, I think I was wrong. I should have insisted that that event go ahead on the original date. It's the duty, my lords, of government to ensure that its citizens can go about their lawful business in safety. It is the police who have the responsibility of discharging that duty. And alas, my lords, they have not always distinguished themselves in discharging that responsibility in recent months. So more needs to be done. And I hope that this Memorial Day and this debate and the debate which is to take place in the other place, I hope they help to get that message across. At the annual memorial service, which used to take place in Hyde Park and now takes place at other venues, which I have attended for many years, a rather beautiful song is sung. Its title and its refrain are the words, "Never again." It is our duty, my lords, to ensure that those words are given their full meaning.
My lords, may I congratulate the Right Reverend Prelate, the Bishop of Coventry, on her excellent maiden speech and welcome her to this house. And since she tells us that she enjoys singing, can I invite her to accompany me after the debate to the Crypt Chapel to a rehearsal of the Parliament Choir, which is often sung in her cathedral. So I hope she feels at home in your lordship's house. My lords, when I get up in the morning and I dress to come to your lordship's house, I remember my mother as I put on this little ring that belonged to her. And when I think of her, I also think of my father, who had such ambitions for me. And often, when I walk into this chamber, I look up and I wish that they had both lived to sit in the balcony and see me admitted to your lordship's house 25 years ago. I've always tried to make them proud because I am one of the lucky ones who grew up with my own parents and grandparents around me. Although my father served in the British Army to fight the Nazis, he survived the war. But millions of survivors for the events of the terrible time of the Holocaust, especially the children, either have little memory of their parents or nightmarish memories of family members who died. I often think of what it took for Jewish parents to say goodbye to their children, leaving on the Kindertransport or by other means, knowing that they would probably never see them again. To us human beings, as to many other species, our children's lives are more precious to us even than our own. I think we often use things, places, photos, situations to trigger memories of those who went before. That is why we want physical memorials, events and activities to help us remember what we will never want to forget and to ensure that future generations won't either. Art can often do that for us. A wonderful example of that is the collection of ceramic replica shoes made by Jenny Stolzenberg, now displayed in the atrium of Portcullis House, because it reminds us that the Shoah and the other Holocaust mass murders of human beings was not about mathematical numbers such as 6 million. It was about 6 million individual people with 12 million feet that took them to their terrible fate. And the question we should ask ourselves is why? Why did it happen? I have my own theory. I have always felt that there are many different ways of being human, and we should treat all with kindness and respect. Indeed, that is a fundamental part of my political philosophy and the way I try to live my life. The fact is that the Jews were persecuted by the Nazis because they were seen as other, as they had been for centuries. And that expression, which was also mentioned by the Right Reverend Prelate, the Bishop of Coventry, is now used to indicate people who are different from the majority. People with a different skin colour, different gender, identity, different religion, different traditions, different nationality or language or culture, different values or ways of life. And that othering can lead to discrimination, inequality of opportunity, and even hatred and violence. That othering of other human beings is the danger we should all fear most in today's world. It's not just about slavery, which we all thought was stamped out years ago, but we know is actually still happening. It's happening now in many different ways. Today, racial discrimination of all kinds, anti-Semitism, the bombing of Ukrainian people by the Russians because they don't want to be Russian, the repression of women who do not conform to the way men want them to live in Iran, the persecution of people suspected of being other by ICE on behalf of the state in the United States. How ironic that indigenous people, yes, indigenous people, are having to carry their tribal ID with them on the streets of Minnesota. All these things, if allowed to take hold in a society, can lead to disaster and inhumanity. We need to be afraid, very afraid, if we see signs of it happening in our own country. And we need to stop it before it can take hold. After all, we've all heard the warning of Pastor Martin Niemöller from his own sad experience. Here's part of it. They came for the communists, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. And then it goes on, and it ends. They came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. And then they came for me. My lords, we should speak out and speak up loud and clear for what kind of country we are and should be. And that is why I think the theme chosen for this year's Holocaust Memorial Day is so right. Bridging generations is vital. If we are to alert our children to the danger to our country of every kind of othering, because although we are reminded that the Holocaust was about the slaughter of 6 million Jews and the suffering of millions of others who survived, it was also by the slaughter of other groups who were regarded as other and therefore seen to be a danger to those in power. Power is so dangerous when it is linked to ignorance, greed, and inhumanity. And that is why I am glad that Holocaust Memorial Day is not just about a big concert in a big concert hall and memorial services around physical memorial installations, but small community events all over the country, in towns, villages, schools, and homes, with their candles in their windows. So when we look up at our public buildings lit up in purple tomorrow evening, let us remember those who died in the Shoah and other Holocaust events, and celebrate and protect those who live on. But let us also vow that we will do everything we can to bring up our children in full knowledge of the Holocaust, and always to treat others with kindness and respect, no matter how different they are from ourselves.
My Lords, first of all, I'd like to thank the Noble Baroness, the Minister, for bringing forward this debate to take note of the Holocaust Memorial Day, which falls tomorrow, and for her very thought-provoking speech. And it was passionate, and I could feel that she felt it very deeply. I'm also grateful to all noble lords for their thought-provoking, their passionate and their moving contributions to commemorate all those 6 million Jewish men, women and children who were murdered in the Holocaust by the Nazi regime and its collaborators. I'd also like to congratulate the Right Reverend Prelate, the Bishop of Coventry, for her excellent maiden speech, and I really look forward to hearing more of those speeches in the years to come. Having spoken in and brought forward this debate in previous years, it's a privilege to speak to this debate once again. My Lords, this year's theme, Bridging Generations, is not only an invitation to remembrance, but, my Lords, a call to action. With each year that passes, we are left with fewer and fewer survivors and eyewitnesses to the Holocaust, and it is increasingly up to us to pass on their memory. The noble lady, the minister, read out the names of our heroic Holocaust survivors who have died this year, and to their family and their friends, may their memory be blessed. But it was this month that Harry Ulmer MBE sadly died at the age of 98. Harry was born in Poland. His family was subject to forced labour following the German invasion. In 1942, Harry, his brother and their father were sent to Plaszow labour camp in Krakow. After a year, he was just then 16, Harry was moved again to work in the chemical factories where many, many thousands died from poisoning, from epidemics, from starvation and from exhaustion. Weakened prisoners were simply shot by the SS. In July 1944, shortly before the German retreat, a selection of those prisoners resulted in Harry being sent to Schleppchen in Germany, a sub-camp of Birkenwald concentration camp. As one of the surviving prisoners there, he was transported yet again, this time to Trevenchen ghetto in Czechoslovakia. And it was from here he finally was liberated on the 8th of May, 1945. Harry came to the UK with a group of children and survivors known as the Boys. Recalling his arrival, he said, and I quote, "It was freedom." The suffering he experienced clearly didn't hold him back. He qualified as a dentist and became a British citizen in 1950 to serve in the British Army. He retired reluctantly, I might add, at the age of 86, and his commitment to educating the next generation continued all those years. We are lucky to have called Harry a fellow countryman. His memoir was entitled "My Revenge on Hitler is My Family." And I take this opportunity to offer, on behalf of your Lordship's House, our sincere condolences to Harry's children, his grandchildren, and his great-grandchildren. It is an understatement to say his story is an inspiration. It is a profound loss that he is no longer here to tell his story himself. And his memory, let it be a blessing. Bridging generations reminds us that memory is not passive. It is something we must actively carry and actively pass on. It is particularly alarming, as we've heard today, therefore, that the number of UK schools commemorating the Holocaust has dropped by nearly 60% since the October the 7th pogrom carried out by the Hamas massacre of 1,200 Jewish people. My Lords, this is shocking in this country. But I commend and indeed recommend, as a matter of urgency, the work of the Holocaust Educational Trust and the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust, as well as all the other organisations, museums, teachers and volunteers who commit to educating the next generation about the Holocaust. Now more than ever, at a time when social media spreads misinformation to children, and at a time when anti-Semitism, as we've heard so passionately today, is on the rise, they need to be taught about the horrors that took place and how it is that they came about. Indeed, these horrors occurred not just because of a few monsters at the top, but because, my Lords, ordinary people and the monster that we all know humans are capable of becoming. Moreover, children need to be instilled with, and we ourselves need reminding of, the values that prompted people to think critically, to be courageous, and to stand up to evil in daily life. What lessons could be more valuable or more important? Those educators who are denying our pupils the chance to participate in the Holocaust Memorial Day are doing our children a disservice, and I dare say in some cases doing so out of moral cowardice. Furthermore, the work of these organisations and the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust should not just be confined to the classroom. It wasn't school children, my lords, who committed the terrorist attacks in Sydney, Australia, or on the Heaton Park Synagogue in Manchester. We on these benches welcome the government's interventions in education, but also in security and taking action within our institutions. It is a source of shame that these measures have become necessary, but it's also a wake-up call that we all need to do more to uphold the dignity of every human life and to cultivate cohesion in our country. In this vein, I would like just to give thanks to the work of His Majesty the King and to all the royal family who in the last year have led the way in marking the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau and indeed of Europe. But I also note that today in history, in 1482, the first printed edition of the Torah in Hebrew was completed in Bologna in Italy. This set, my lords, the model for the page format still in use. The contribution of our Judeo-Christian heritage to our civilization today is undeniable. And my lords, Jewish communities continue in this country to contribute to our society in most extraordinary ways. My lords, I end with my thoughts and prayers that are with those victims of the Holocaust, their family, and all those who continue to be affected by anti-Semitism on British soil and abroad to this day.
My lords, as ever on these occasions, I'm struck by the depth, dignity and sincerity of the contributions we've heard. I'm not sure I can quite do justice to every powerful point made today, but I will do my best. Can I start by congratulating the Right Reverend Prelate, the Bishop of Coventry, on her excellent maiden speech and welcome her to the House. She reminded us of the way Coventry is linking its devastation in the Second World War, the hatred that led to that, and the importance of speaking to our young people about peace building and reconciliation. And I'm grateful to her for her words and hope she enjoys her time here in this House. This debate is one that year after year brings out the very best in our House. It reminds us not only of the weight of our shared responsibility, but also of the compassion and the urge for moral clarity that unites us. We come together in remembrance of 6 million Jewish men, women and children murdered in the Holocaust, as well as thousands of Roma, Sinti, disabled people, gay men, political opponents, Jehovah's Witnesses and the victims of genocides in Cambodia, Rwanda and Srebrenica. Their memories guide us, challenge us and call us to account. And can I particularly thank those noble lords who have given their own personal witness from themselves or their families today. The Noble Lord Austin, Noble Lord Evans, Lord Shinquin, Baroness Ramsay, the Noble Lord Howard, and particularly to Baroness Scott for her tribute to Harry Ulmer. I'm very grateful for that. Baroness Ramsay asked us, do you think all this is better, in a quote, do you think all this is better forgotten? I hope the fact that we're debating this today means that none of us think that at all. And can I just at this point pay tribute to Stevenage Liberal Jewish Synagogue, particularly to Terry and Gillian Wolfe and Rabbi Danny Rich, who have supported me in my attempts to continue to educate myself about the Jewish faith and the life of Jews in Britain today. And when Baroness Scott was speaking about the Torah, it was an absolute marvel to me to watch Danny Rich pick up the Torah, which, in case people haven't seen, the scroll that's unrolled in a synagogue, and then there is no punctuation, there's no spaces in it. He navigates his way around that Torah, and he explained to me how that works. It's been a real education to me, and I'm grateful to them for all of that. A number of noble lords, starting with the noble Lord Pickles, who spoke very powerfully about the continuing scourge of anti-Semitism. And the noble Lord Massey reminded us of what an ancient hatred that is, but of course with a current and very present shadow that hangs over us all. Anti-Semitism is completely abhorrent and has no place in our society, and that's why we all must take a strong lead on tackling it in all its forms. Sadly, we've seen how events in the Middle East are used as an excuse to stir up hatred against British Jewish communities. The horrific terrorist attack on Manchester Synagogue on Yom Kippur, mentioned by many noble lords this afternoon, the holiest day in the Jewish calendar, and an attack on the British values that unite all of us. We stand together with British Jews and with all Jewish people. We condemn unequivocally the hatred and poisonous extremism which has led to these attacks. And as we think about that attack and the dreadful massacre at Bondi Beach, Baroness Deitch raised the powerful issues around the 7th of October and how we think of those. And a powerful plea that as we face today's anti-Semitism, we continue to keep alive the work that's being done to link the anti-Semitism that we think of in terms of the Holocaust with what's going on today all around us. And I'm grateful for the mention of the report from Lord Mann and Penny Mordaunt. I'm very grateful for their work in this respect. Baroness Ramsay spoke powerfully about how we must confront failings in the organisations we are close to, even when it's painful, what Baroness Harding, I think, referred to as the very uncomfortable introspection that we need to undergo through our thinking about this. And Baroness Ludford is right, speaking out is a duty for all of us, and Baroness Walmsley reminded us of the powerful words of Martin Niemöller. Much of this anti-Semitism is feeding into some of the very awful words we hear about Holocaust denial and distortion. Lord Massey spoke powerfully about denial, and the government condemns any organisation or individual that attempts to deny the Holocaust. We're implacably opposed to people such as the revisionist historian David Irving, and have spoken out recently against the Iranian government who are attempting to cast doubt on the facts of the Holocaust. The government deplores attempts to deny the Holocaust, including those views expressed in a pseudo-intellectual manner. It is, of course, the case that if Holocaust denial is expressed in a way that is threatening, abusive or insulting and incites racial hatred, or is likely to do so, then it would be unlawful under the Public Order Act 1986, and Lord Howard and others have said how important it is that these laws are upheld. They're there for a purpose, and we must all make sure that they are taken seriously. The noble Lord Massey, Baroness Deitch and Lord Austin referred to the impact of the current conflict in Israel and Palestine. We profoundly welcome the ceasefire agreement, of course, and we're working intensively to support the 20-point plan for peace. It is vital that both parties uphold the agreement as we implement phase 2 on governance, stabilisation and construction. We continue to mourn the devastating loss of life on the 7th of October and afterwards, and the ongoing desperate humanitarian situation in Gaza. We're deeply relieved that all living hostages have now been released, and we continue to insist that the body of the last remaining hostage is returned. Even with the hostages released, we recognise the trauma and terror Hamas's actions have inflicted on hostages and their families endures, and we continue to work with partners to maintain the ceasefire and ensure the provision of urgent humanitarian assistance for the people of Gaza. Diplomacy, not more bloodshed, is how we get securities for security for Israelis and Palestinians. And that requires a political process and political horizon towards a two-state solution. Only that over time will ensure long-term peace and security for Israelis and Palestinians. Much of the debate this afternoon has focused on issues around education, and I think it's right that it's done so, particularly in view of the theme that we have for Holocaust Memorial this year. Baroness Ludford mentioned Dov Foreman and Lily Eberts, and I remember very well listening to Dov and to Lily. And Baroness Deitch mentioned the distortion of social media for young people and how that's it's almost as if they're trying to educate themselves, but they're getting a distorted picture because of what they're picking up from social media. The Department for Education actively supports schools to provide high-quality teaching on the Holocaust through the funding of 2 core programmes. And we're also funding a 2-year programme supporting Holocaust survivor testimony and teaching programme. Lessons from Auschwitz give students aged 16 to 18 the opportunity to visit Auschwitz-Birkenau, and funding for 25-26 is £2,300,000. And the Centre for Holocaust Education CPD programme supports teachers in their professional development, with the Pears Foundation and UCL contributing match and in-kind support to the same amount as the government, which is £500,000. The Supporting Holocaust Survivor Testimony and Teaching programme will support schools in using recorded Holocaust survivor testimony in their teaching, and funding is being provided for that and is being delivered by the Holocaust Education Trust. The Bishop of Coventry referred to what is the most important thing of all of this, I think, in education, and that is when you get an outstanding teacher who can inspire you and educate you in relation to these topics. And then there's a much wider programme of support for tackling anti-Semitism in schools, colleges and universities, and £500,000 of this money has been awarded to the University Jewish Chaplaincy for student welfare on university campuses where we know there's been particular difficulty. Training for university support staff delivered by the Union of Jewish Students began in November with 600 sessions planned over 3 years. And the scholarship programme will provide in-depth training and a learning network with delivery commencing from this month. A Tackling Anti-Semitism in Education Innovation Fund is launching shortly to promote tolerant debate, and successful projects will commence from April. And the Department for Education's Educate Against Hate website provides schools and parents with free, quality-assured teaching resources, helping to navigate discussions over sensitive topics and aid in our endeavours to ending hate and prejudice in our schools. And on the 5th of November, we published the final report of the Independent Curriculum and Assessment Review alongside the government's response. The report's recommendations for curriculum reform will help tackle hatred and prejudice by ensuring that in areas such as citizenship and religious education, the refreshed national curriculum and its supporting resources reflect our modern society. And there'll be a renewed focus on improving young people's media literacy, helping them think more critically about the content they consume. There have also been incidents of anti-Semitism on university campuses, as we all know. There were 35 incidents reported to the CST in the first 6 months of 2025, in which the victims or offenders were students or academics, or which involved student unions, societies, or other bodies. 16 took place on campus or university property, and 13 occurred online. That is a drop of 64% from 98 higher education incidents reported in the first half of 2024. But each one of those incidents affects somebody deeply and for a long time. The total is twice the 17 incidents that were logged across January to June in 2023, which was not impacted by a trigger event in the Middle East. The Secretary of State has written to university vice-chancellors in October to urge them to take steps to protect Jewish students from harassment. Where lawful protest crosses the line into harassment, intimidation and glorification of terrorism, we expect universities to use the full extent of their disciplinary processes to take swift and decisive action to tackle it. Turning now to the commemoration of on Holocaust Memorial Day, our national event, Education and Community Activities, I think the Noble Lord Pickles spoke of the reduction in these events taking place in education establishments. And according to the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust, in 2023, more than 2,000 secondary schools held commemorative events. But on October the 7th of that year, things changed. In January 24, just a few months after the deadliest attack on Jewish people since the Holocaust, the number fell dramatically to less than 1,200, and in 2025, a figure which I think the Noble Lord gave, just 854 schools chose to hold an event. So we must redouble our efforts in terms of commemoration here. In terms of our Holocaust Memorial and Learning Centre, mentioned by the Noble Baroness Deach, Baroness Harding and the Noble Lord Pickles, I agree that we must face our past. The government is determined to deliver on the long-standing commitment to build a new national memorial to the Holocaust, and can I, like Baroness Harding, thank the Noble Lord Pickles for all the work he's done in this respect. The memorial will stand as a reminder to all in Parliament and the whole nation of our responsibility to remain vigilant against intolerance and bigotry. The new Holocaust Memorial will honour the 6 million Jewish people murdered in the Holocaust and all other victims of the Nazi persecution. There can be no more powerful symbol of our commitment to remembering those men, women and children murdered by the Nazis and their collaborators than placing the memorial in Victoria Tower Gardens, prominent among the buildings and memorials that symbolise our nation and its values. I want to just reflect for a moment on the comments made by the Right Reverend Prelate, the Bishop of Coventry, on faith and belief in the UK. For millions of people in this country, their faith and belief identity is a crucial part of their lives, and our nation is enriched by a diverse tapestry of faiths and beliefs. The government is committed to harnessing the power of faith for national renewal, helping us make progress against our missions and improving social cohesion. Baroness Deach spoke about the importance of leaders of faith other than Judaism speaking out against anti-Semitism. I think that's a really important point. And can I just say to my noble friend, Lord Sahota, about the Amritsar massacre, a tragic event, and one quite separate to today's debate, but I would say previous Prime Ministers have called the massacre deeply shameful, and the incident is a shameful scar on British Indian history. So I understand the pain that this still causes in our Sikh community, and I'm happy to discuss with my noble friend outside of this debate. I'd also express my deep gratitude to the remarkable organisations in the UK that work tirelessly to ensure the Holocaust is remembered and crucially understood. Their work goes far beyond commemoration. It shapes minds, it builds empathy, and it confronts ignorance. And along with the Noble Baroness Scott and the Noble Lord Evans, can I pay a special tribute to Karen Pollock, CBE, Chief Executive of the Holocaust Educational Trust, and Olivia Marks-Waldman, OBE, Chief Executive of the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust. Their leadership has ensured that survivors' voices continue to reach new generations. It remains profoundly important that the Holocaust is the only historic event that is compulsory within the national curriculum for history at Key Stage 3. This government has made a firm commitment it will remain a compulsory topic in the reformed national curriculum, including in academy schools when the reforms are implemented. Our Department for Education continues its active support for high-quality Holocaust education through University College London's Centre for Holocaust Education and its continuous professional development programmes. Through the Holocaust Education Trust's transformative programme for 16 to 18-year-olds, which I mentioned earlier, and the Survivor Testimony and Teaching programme. As many lords have touched upon today, we are approaching a moment in history when no Holocaust survivors will remain to share their testimony in person. This is a profound and sobering reality. The survivors who have spent their lives retelling the most painful chapters of their past so that we might build a better future will not always be with us. That's why the responsibility now falls to all of us to redouble our efforts, to preserve their stories, to speak the truth when others distort it, to ensure the lessons of the Holocaust are never diminished, never denied, and never forgotten. My Lords, thank you for the dignity, compassion and commitment you have brought to today's debate. It has been a privilege to listen and take part in the debate. And as we face a world where the comfortable world order so many of us have grown up with is disintegrating around us, it's even more important that we continue to remember these things. And I will, in this debate, we put aside our party politics for our compassion, our determination to remember, and our common humanity. And I'd like to close with the words from Lord Austin that we must pledge ourselves not to platitudes, but to action. And I think, listening to the debate today, we are all determined to do that, to make sure that this is not just about memories, this is about making sure we create the hope for the future, that this will never happen again.
Very good. The question is that this motion be agreed to. Is many of that opinion and shall say content? Contrary not content, the contents have it. My Lords, perhaps this might be a moment at which noble lords could leave the chamber quickly and quietly. The answer to an urgent question asked in the House of Commons today, Diego Garcia Military Base in British Indian Ocean Territory Bill, Baroness Chapman of Darlington.
My Lords, on the 22nd of May, the Diego Garcia Treaty was signed and laid before the House. As the Defence Secretary told the House on the day of signature, this treaty secures the strategically important UK-US military base on the island of Diego Garcia. The Diego Garcia military base is essential to the security of the UK and our key allies, including the United States. It is essential to keeping British people safe. It is also one of our most significant contributions to the transatlantic defence and security partnership because it enables rapid deployment of operations and forces across the Middle East, East Africa and South Asia, helping combat some of the most challenging threats, including from terrorism and hostile states. Its unique strategic location creates real military advantage across the Indo-Pacific. The facility on Diego Garcia has helped to collect data used to support counter-terrorism operations, including against high-value Islamic State targets in recent years. We've been clear many times on this. The UK will never compromise on our national security. As we've repeatedly made clear, the agreement that we have struck is vital for protecting our national security, guaranteeing the long-term future of a vital base for both the UK and US, which have been under threat, as the opposition fully understood and were briefed on. The deal secures the operations of the joint US-UK base on Diego Garcia for generations. It was publicly welcomed by the US, Australia and all other Five Eyes partners, as well as key international partners including India, Japan and South Korea. Just last week, this House spent 2 hours debating the Lords' amendments to the bill. The opposition will know, of course, that programming of business in the other place is a matter for them and not for us. However, the Lords' consideration of Commons amendments has been delayed because the opposition tabled a wrecking amendment hours before the other place rose and on the day before a scheduled debate. This is irresponsible and reckless behaviour from the official opposition in the second House, using programming tactics to frustrate the implementation of a treaty on a critical national security matter. I have to say it stands in stark contrast to the very reasoned, constructive criticisms and questions and suggestions that have been made by members from other parties, and indeed with crossbenchers, which we've engaged with in good faith at every stage and will continue to do so. This is on the opposition, because this amendment is not only unnecessary, but it's toying with our national security. It is only right that we take some time to consider next steps on programming, because we remain confident that this treaty is the best way forward. The Lords will consider the Commons amendments in due course, and this will be announced in the usual way. The Government is committed to the deal which protects joint UK-US base on Diego Garcia. Some have sought to sabotage the process through procedural motions and parliamentary stunts. We're instead focused on delivering this bill to protect our national security.
My Lords, I thank the noble lady for repeating that answer. She's just said, repeating that answer, accused my amendment of being wrecking. That, my Lords, is simply not true. And I have it in writing from our excellent clerks that the amendment is dilatory and not fatal. It is not wrecking. So I hope the noble lady will take the opportunity to apologise when she answers those questions. Instead of answering many of the very serious concerns raised from all opposition parties about Chagossian rights and many other serious flaws in this agreement, all we heard in the other place from the Minister was bluster and to accuse those of us of asking those questions of somehow playing parliamentary games. This is a serious issue, so let me ask a couple of serious questions to the noble lady. Firstly, in her letter, sent to me somewhat bizarrely at 11:30 p.m. on Friday evening, I have to say she's lucky to have such dedicated private office staff, she referred to international arrangements needing to be in place before they can ratify the Mauritius Treaty. For the benefit of the House, can she confirm that what she means by that is that the US government has to formally agree to amend the 1966 treaty? And by failing to do this before they concluded the treaty, the Prime Minister has effectively given Trump a veto on this deal. Secondly, if they do persuade President Trump to update that treaty, which I have to say looks unlikely, can she confirm that the amended 1966 treaty would then need to go fully through the CRAG process in this Parliament, all before they can ratify their new deal?
Well, I am glad that the noble Lord opposite has finally reread my contributions in this place, I think from November, where I did talk about an exchange of notes that would be needed with the United States in relation to the 1966 treaty. So I'm glad that he's internalised this, what I said then was a fact. There would need to be an exchange of letters, and that is in hand. He asked about whether or not that would then necessitate a CRAG process. We will look at that when we get the detail of those letters, and if it does, then of course we will do that, but it may well not. But obviously, that if we need to, then of course we can. On whether or not his amendment is wrecking, it is wrecking in its effect, because what it would do is delay. The only piece of wording in it, as I understand it, that is actually binding on the government is the issue of the date, which he put in his amendment would be the 23rd of March. This would breach the agreement that we have with Mauritius. It's a self-imposed deadline, but that is the deadline that we've set ourselves as part of this agreement.
My Lords, with regards to the 1966 treaty, it is worth, I think, just acknowledging that one of that part of that treaty, Article 2, is the basis upon which, under the euphemism of what the treaty calls an administrative measure, was the expulsion of a population from that archipelago and the forced depopulation. It was that treaty which was the basis, which I hope every subsequent government, including this, will feel shame. However, that treaty is the basis of the relationship to the United States. Therefore, it's quite extraordinary that under Article 11, which stated that the treaty would expire in 2017, and then have an automatic extension for 20 years, was not chosen to be extended by the previous Conservative government. So this treaty, which now we should all depend upon for our long-term security relationships with the United States, under the previous government, would run out in 2037. Article 1 of the treaty, however, does state the territory shall remain under United Kingdom sovereignty. Can the Minister confirm that when the previous government opened negotiations with Mauritius on the basis of ceding sovereignty, whether or not there were any diplomatic messages to our ally in the United States that Article 1 now needed to be reviewed and indeed updated?
That the situation as regards the 1966 treaty was understood all along it's certainly been understood by my government, and I'm assuming that was understood. I can't see why it wouldn't have been understood by the previous government, which does make this rather late in the day sort of pseudo-alarm seem rather strange, but here we are. But I do want to take the opportunity to agree with the Noble Lord about the shame that he suggests we should feel at the forced displacement of the population. He's right to do that, and I can tell him that, yes, I do feel that way.
My lords, my noble friend suggested that this agreement was supported by our Five Eyes partners, including the United States. In fact, the Secretary of State of the US made a statement to those effects. I know from briefings that we've had on the ISC the important nature of this base, not just for us, but also for the United States and our Five Eyes partners. And they were looking for the stability which this agreement gives. In the other place today, it was suggested by some that the National Security Advisor has misled the United States in this agreement. Could you actually say that's completely utterly untrue?
Well, thank the my noble friend, Chair of the ISC, for drawing that to our attention. I was not aware that that accusation had been made, but of course it is completely untrue and it's unfounded. And I can only think that these things do get